Budapest's night sky split open without warning. The dimensional rift wasn't elegant. It was a ragged tear in reality itself, bleeding crimson light across the Danube River. Pedestrians on the chain bridge stumbled backward as space folded, twisted, and vomited forth a figure who hit the cobblestones hard enough to crack them. Blade rolled to his feet in one fluid motion, silver-edged sword already drawn, dark coat settling around him like a shroud. His enhanced senses immediately cataloged the wrongness. Different air pressure, different city sounds, different scent to the night. The rift sealed behind him with a sound like tearing flesh, leaving only the faint ozone smell of disrupted reality. "Damn," he muttered, scanning the bridge. Civilians were running, screaming in Hungarian. Security cameras swiveled toward him, sloppy. And the vampire lord he'd been chasing, some ancient bastard named Deacon who discovered blood magic capable of dimensional travel, was gone. And Blade was stranded. He moved quickly, vampire speed carrying him off the bridge and into the shadowed streets of Budapest's castle district before police response could organize. His internal compass was already recalibrating. Different universe, same mission. Find vampires, kill vampires, protect the living. The specifics could wait. What Blade didn't know, couldn't know yet, was that he'd landed in a world where the war between vampires and their creations had raged for centuries in absolute secrecy. Where vampires weren't scattered covens of degenerates, but organized aristocracies with political structures spanning continents, where their former slaves, the Lycans, had risen in rebellion and now fought a guerrilla war that painted Eastern Europe's nights in blood. He was about to disrupt a delicate, terrible balance. 3 blocks into his reconnaissance, Blade's nose caught it. The metallic tang of spilled blood, recent and abundant. He followed the scent to an industrial area near the river, where a warehouse door hung open, revealing carnage inside. Bodies. Human bodies, at least a dozen, torn apart with savage efficiency. The wounds were wrong, too massive for vampire fangs, more like animal attacks, but with disturbing precision. Blade crouched beside one corpse, noting the claw marks, the shredded throat. His jaw tightened. Werewolves, or something close enough. "Not my first rodeo," he said to the corpse, standing. His world had its share of lycanthropes. Rare, usually cursed, always dangerous. But the scent here was different. Stronger, more organized. A sound. Footsteps on the warehouse roof. Multiple contacts, moving with predatory coordination. Blade's hand went to his modified Glock, loaded with silver hollow points laced with garlic extract. He turned slowly, tracking the movement above. "I know you're up there," he called out. "You've got 3 seconds to show yourselves before I start ventilating the ceiling." Silence, then laughter. Harsh, animalistic, but distinctly male. "Silver bullets," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. "You're either very informed or very lucky, vampire." Blade's eyes narrowed. "I'm no vampire. Your scent says otherwise." 3 figures dropped from the rafters with inhuman grace, landing in a triangle formation around him. They were human-shaped, but moved wrong. Too fluid, too powerful. And their eyes caught the warehouse's dim light and reflected it back with an amber glow. Lycans. But not like any werewolves Blade had encountered. These weren't mindless beasts, cursed by lunar cycles. These were soldiers. The largest, easily 6'5", muscled like a prize fighter with dark skin and a shaved head, stepped forward. "You carry vampire scent, but you walk with a hunter's purpose. Explain yourself before we decide you're a death dealer spy." Death dealer? Blade kept his weapon trained on the speaker while tracking the other 2 in his peripheral vision. "I don't know what that is. What I do know is, you just slaughtered a warehouse full of humans. That makes you my problem." The Lycan's expression shifted from suspicion to surprise. "Humans? You think we—" He barked a laugh. "Those weren't humans, Vampire, and those were Viktor's couriers. Blood slaves, traitors to their own species." Blade's finger tensed on the trigger. "You're saying they worked for vampires?" "Willingly," one of the other Lycans spat. A woman, lean and vicious-looking. "Fed the leeches information, helped them hunt our kind. They got what they deserved." This was wrong. In Blade's world, the lines were clear. Vampires were parasites, humans were victims, and his job was simple extermination. But here, humans collaborated with vampires. Werewolves fought organized guerrilla campaigns. "What kind of hell did I drop into?" Blade muttered. The big Lycan's eyes narrowed. "You're not from here, are you? That dimensional tear over the Danube? That was you." Not a question. These things were smarter than they looked. Before Blade could respond, his enhanced hearing caught it. Vehicles approaching fast, multiple engines, tactical formation. The Lycans heard it too, tensing immediately. "Death dealers," the woman hissed. Someone reported the tear. The big Lycan locked eyes with Blade. "Whoever you are, Vampire, you have one choice. Run with us, or face Viktor's executioners alone. Decide, now." Blade glanced toward the approaching vehicles, then back at the Lycans. Every instinct screamed that these were monsters, predators, things that needed killing. But they'd called the vampires leeches, talked about Viktor like an enemy, mentioned slavery. "I don't run," Blade said flatly. "And I don't team up with things that slaughter civilians, even if they're traitors." The Lycan nodded, almost respectfully. "Then you'll die well. For what it's worth. You've got spine." The warehouse doors exploded inward as black SUVs screeched to a halt outside. Figures poured out, men and women in tactical black leather, moving with liquid grace, eyes reflecting light like cats. Vampires. But not like the degenerate bloodsuckers Blade usually hunted. These were soldiers. The lead vampire, a woman with dark hair pulled back severely, swept the warehouse with eyes like ice. When her gaze landed on Blade, she froze. "Impossible," she whispered. Blade met her stare, his hand moving to his sword hilt. "Lady, you have no idea." The standoff held for one crystalline moment. Vampire death dealers on one side, Lycan rebels on the other, and Blade caught in the middle, belonging to neither. Then someone fired the first shot, and Budapest's supernatural underworld learned that the deadliest hunter in the multiverse had arrived. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character in universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Silver bullets from Lycan weapons tore through the air, met by the death dealer's specialized ammunition. Blade moved like a shadow made lethal, his sword singing free of its sheath. A death dealer rushed him, male, overconfident, fangs bared. Blade's blade took his head in a single stroke, the body crumbling to ash before it hit the ground. Wait, ash? In Blade's universe, vampires didn't disintegrate. They died like anyone else, messily and permanently. But they left corpses, no time to analyze. Two more death dealers converged on him. Blade ducked under a tactical baton strike, drove his elbow into one attacker's throat with bone-crushing force, then pivot-kicked the second into a support pillar. The one he'd struck in the throat gasped, staggered, and Blade saw genuine fear in those inhuman eyes. You're a vampire," the death dealer choked out. How are you so? Blade's sword ended the question and the vampire's existence simultaneously. Behind him, the Lycans were fighting with savage coordination, but the Death Dealers had numbers and superior weapons. The big Lycan took 3 rounds to the chest, not silver, thankfully, and kept fighting. But the woman went down hard when a Death Dealer put a silver bullet through her shoulder. The ice-eyed female vampire who led the assault watched Blade with calculating intensity even as she directed her forces. She was analyzing him, cataloging his movements, his speed, his techniques. Smart, dangerous. Blade vaulted over a crate, using the high ground to survey the battlefield. 5 Death Dealers down permanently, 3 Lycans wounded but fighting. The odds were shifting, but not fast enough. He made a decision he'd regret later. Blade pulled a UV grenade from his coat, primed it, and lobbed it into the center of the Death Dealer formation. Down, the big Lycan roared, recognizing the threat even if he didn't understand the technology. The grenade detonated in a sphere of pure ultraviolet light. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. Death Dealers caught in the blast radius ignited like dry kindling, their screams cutting off as they burst into flames and disintegrated into ash. The UV light lasted only 3 seconds, but when it faded, 8 vampires had been reduced to nothing. The warehouse fell silent except for crackling flames and heavy breathing. The ice-eyed vampire stared at the ash piles where her team had stood, then slowly raised her gaze to Blade. "What are you?" Blade ejected his Glock's spent magazine, slammed a fresh one home. "Your extinction." She was fast, faster than almost any vampire Blade had fought. She closed the distance in a blur, twin pistols aimed at his head. But Blade was faster. He twisted aside, the bullets passing through the space his skull had occupied a microsecond before, and his sword came up in a vicious arc. She parried with her pistol, one of the blades striking the weapon's reinforced frame and sending sparks flying. For 3 exchanges, they moved faster than human eyes could follow. Strike, parry, counter, dodge. She was good. Centuries-old good. But Blade had been hunting vampires since before she was born, even if she didn't know it. He feinted high, she moved to block, and his boot caught her in the ribs, with enough force to crack bone. She flew backward, hit the warehouse wall, and slumped down, coughing blood. "Selene!" one of the remaining Death Dealers shouted. Blade was already moving toward her, sword raised for the killing stroke. This one was too dangerous to leave alive. But the big Lycan was suddenly there, massive hand catching Blade's wrist with crushing strength. "Enough. We leave, now." Blade's eyes narrowed. "Move your hand before I remove it." "They're retreating," the Lycan said, jerking his head toward the Death Dealers, who were indeed pulling back, carrying their wounded leader. "You've made your point. But reinforcements will come, and UV tricks won't save you from an entire coven. We go. Now." Blade looked at the vampire called Seline, meeting her eyes across the warehouse. She was clutching her ribs, blood seeping between her fingers. But her gaze was sharp, analytical, burning with questions. "This isn't finished," Blade told her. "No," she agreed, voice tight with pain. "It most certainly isn't." The Lycans were already moving, dragging their wounded toward a back exit. The big one released Blade's wrist, took a step back. "Your choice, Daywalker, but choose fast." Blade sheathed his sword, made a calculation. He needed information about this world, and these Lycans had it. Temporary alliance. Nothing more. "Lead the way," he said. As they disappeared into Budapest's network of tunnels and sewers, Blade caught one last glimpse of Selene being helped into an SUV by her surviving team. She was speaking rapidly into a communication device, her eyes still fixed on the warehouse. Blade knew that look. He'd seen it on 1,000 vampires' faces in the moment before they died. It was the look of a predator who just found something worth hunting. The Lycan safe house was buried 3 levels beneath an abandoned Soviet-era factory on Budapest's industrial outskirts. Blade followed the pack through a maze of service tunnels, his enhanced senses cataloging every turn, every defensible position, every potential exit. Old habits. Never enter a location you can't fight your way out of. The big Lycan, who'd introduced himself only as Rays, moved with the confidence of someone on home territory. The wounded female, Singe, kept her hand pressed to the silver-poisoned shoulder wound, but didn't slow down. The third Lycan, a wiry man called Pierce, kept glancing back at Blade with undisguised suspicion. "He's vampire," Pierce muttered to Rays, in what he probably thought was too quiet for Blade to hear. "We should put him down now, but before he reports back to Viktor." "He just killed 8 death dealers with a weapon I've never seen," Rays replied, equally quiet. And Selene looked at him like he was a ghost. "We need to know what he is before we do anything permanent." Blade said nothing. Let them think they were being subtle. The safe house proper was a converted storage facility. Concrete walls reinforced with steel plating, UV-protected windows, interesting choice for werewolves, and an arsenal that would make most third-world militaries jealous. 20 or so Lycans occupied the space, most armed, all watching Blade with various mixtures of hostility and curiosity. At the center of the room, standing before a tactical map of Budapest marked with red and blue pins, was a man who radiated authority despite his casual stance. Tall, powerfully built, eyes with shoulder-length dark hair and eyes that held centuries of suffering and rage. He turned as they entered, and Blade felt the shift in the room's energy. This was the Alpha, the leader. "Rays," the man said, voice deep and controlled. "You were supposed to eliminate the couriers and extract, not start a war with Viktor's death dealers." "Wasn't us who started it," Rays replied. He gestured to Blade. "Him. He dropped out of a hole in the sky and killed half of Selene's team in under a minute." Every eye in the room locked onto Blade. The leader studied him for a long moment, and Blade studied back. This wasn't some rabid beast pretending at civilization. This was a warrior, a general, someone who'd led armies and watched them die. The weight of command hung on him like armor. "The dimensional rift over the Danube," the leader said. It wasn't a question. "We felt it. Viktor's entire coven is in an uproar. They think it's a weapon, an attack, a sign. And then you appear, killing death dealers with technology they've never encountered, carrying vampire scent, but walking in." He paused, eyes narrowing. "When did you arrive? What time?" "Around midnight," Blade said evenly. "And you walked the streets before reaching the warehouse? In the open?" "Yeah. So?" The room went absolutely silent. The leader took a step forward. "You walked in moonlight. In the open. No protective gear. No UV-shielded vehicle. You're vampire kind. I can smell it on you. But you walked openly under the moon without fear of transformation or detection." Blade's hand drifted toward his sword hilt. "I don't transform into anything. I am what I am." "Which is?" The leader's tone was sharp now, demanding. "My name is Blade. I'm a Dhampir, half vampire, half human. Where I come from, I hunt vampires. That's what I do. That's all I do." He let the words settle before adding, "And I don't give a damn about your war, your politics, or your territory disputes. I'm looking for a way home. Until I find it, I'm going to do what I always do. Protect humans and kill bloodsuckers. Even though you are one? Singe asked, her voice tight with pain as another Lycan worked to extract the silver bullet from her shoulder. Especially because I am one, Blade replied. The leader watched him for another moment, then did something unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't friendly, but it was genuine. I'm Lucian, he said, and you, Blade, may be the most interesting development in this war in 600 years. He turned to the room. Give him space. Feed him if he requires it. No one touches him without my explicit order. The tension dropped a fraction, though the suspicious glares remained. Lucian gestured to the tactical map. Reyes, report on Selene's status. Wounded but alive, Reyes said. Broken ribs, maybe internal bleeding. But she'll heal. She always does. There was a strange note in his voice. Not quite respect, not quite regret. She saw what he did, Lucian said, studying the map. She'll report to Viktor within the hour. They'll want him captured or destroyed, probably both. He looked at Blade. You've painted a target on yourself that won't wash off. Viktor doesn't tolerate threats to his supremacy. Viktor, Blade repeated. I heard that name at the warehouse. Who is he? Lucian's expression darkened. One of the 3 vampire elders who rule the old world coven. He's been awake and in power for centuries, while the other 2 sleep in rotation. Ruthless, paranoid, and utterly committed to maintaining vampire dominance over our kind. Your kind being werewolves. Lycans, Lucian corrected sharply. We are not mindless beasts cursed by the moon. We are a species, created by the same bloodline that spawned the vampires. For centuries, we were their slaves. Bred, collared, controlled. I led the rebellion that freed us. Now we fight for the right to exist without their boot on our throats. Blade processed that. Vampires had created and enslaved an entire species, used them as animals. The brutality was familiar. Vampires were parasites wherever they existed. But the scale was different. This wasn't scattered covens feeding on homeless people. This was organized genocide. And the humans? Blade asked. Where do they fit? Cattle, Pierce said bitterly. To the vampires, at least. Blood slaves at best, food at worst. The covens maintain the masquerade, keep humanity ignorant while they feed in the shadows. Some humans serve them willingly, Singe added, wincing as the silver bullet came free with a wet sound. Like the couriers we killed, traitors who betray their own species for scraps of immortality that will never come. Blade's jaw tightened. In his world, he'd encountered human servants, familiars who worshipped their vampire masters, but never on this scale. And you Lycans? What do you do with humans? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lucian met his gaze steadily. We survive. Some of us feed on them when necessary. We require meat, protein, sustenance that our condition demands. But we don't farm them. We don't enslave them. We take what we need to survive the war Viktor forced upon us. So you kill them when it's convenient, Blade said flatly. We kill to survive a genocide, Lucian replied, voice hard. Don't confuse us with the leeches who kill for pleasure, for sport, for the simple joy of domination. We didn't start this war, Blade, but we will finish it. The 2 locked eyes, hunter and rebel, each measuring the other's conviction. Blade broke the stare first, not out of submission, but calculation. You said Viktor would come for me. When? Soon, Seline is his most effective death dealer, but she's also cautious. She'll brief him personally, which means he'll mobilize a full strike force. You have perhaps 6 hours before dawn. Lucian's tone shifted, became almost conversational. Of course, dawn won't save you. Viktor's forces will simply wait you out, surround whatever location you've chosen, and attack the moment darkness falls again. They can wait all they want, Blade said. A cold smile crossed his face. See, that's the thing about where I come from. Vampires there have some resistance to sunlight. Not much, but enough that the ancient ones can endure it for short periods. Makes hunting them during the day tricky. He pulled back his coat, revealing the array of weapons strapped to his body. But I'm guessing your vampires don't have that luxury. Understanding dawned on Lucian's face. The UV grenade. You didn't use it as a weapon of desperation. You used it to test their vulnerability. And they failed spectacularly, Blade confirmed. Total disintegration in under 3 seconds. Which means when the sun comes up, I'm the only vampire in this entire city who can walk around freely. He let that sink in. Your Viktor can mobilize all the forces he wants. Come morning, I'm going hunting. A murmur rippled through the Lycans. Rays grinned, showing teeth. I'm starting to like this one. Lucian, a young Lycan called from a computer terminal in the corner. You need to see this. Coven activity is spiking. Multiple cell communications, death dealer units being recalled, safe houses going into lockdown. Lucian moved to the terminal, Blade following. The screen showed intercepts of vampire communications, encrypted, but the Lycans had clearly cracked at least some of their codes. They're convening an emergency council, Lucian said, reading the data. All available death dealers ordered to Ordogaz. Ordogaz? Blade asked. Vampire Mansion. Their primary stronghold in Budapest. It's where Viktor holds court, where the Coven leadership gathers. Lucian's finger traced a route on the screen. Underground levels, UV shielded, virtually impenetrable. If they're calling everyone there, it means Viktor wants overwhelming force ready before he makes a move against you. Or it means he's scared, Blade said quietly. Lucian looked at him sharply. Viktor doesn't scare. He's 1,000 years old. He's faced armies. He's never faced someone like me, Blade interrupted. I've hunted vampires for longer than most of your Lycans have been alive. I've killed ancients, pure-blood elders, vampire lords who thought themselves gods. They all had one thing in common. The moment they realized I was the hunter and they were the prey, they got scared. He turned to Lucian. Your Viktor just found out there's something in his city that can kill his people in broad daylight, something that moves like a vampire, fights like a warrior, and doesn't burn in the sun. Yeah, he's terrified. Silence fell across the safe house. Then Lucian started to laugh, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. 600 years, he said, shaking his head. 600 years I've fought these bastards, and I've never seen Viktor call an emergency council, never seen him recall all his forces defensively. He looked at Blade with something approaching respect. You're not just a warrior. You're a paradigm shift. I'm a problem, Blade corrected. Their problem. Now, you want to make yourself useful, you can tell me everything you know about this Ordogaz place. Because come sunrise, I'm going to introduce myself to Viktor properly. Suicide, Pierce said. Even with your daylight immunity, there are too many of them. Death dealers, servants, human familiars with guns. You'll be outnumbered 100 to 1. Blade's smile was colder than winter. I've had worse odds. Lucian studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. Raise, pull up the Ordergaz schematics, everything we have. Singe, once you're patched up, brief him on death dealer tactics and Victor's personal guard. He turned back to Blade. We've been trying to infiltrate that fortress for decades. If you're serious about hitting it, we can provide intelligence, support, maybe even a distraction. In exchange for what? Blade asked, because nothing came free in his experience. In exchange, Lucian said carefully, none for the possibility that the enemy of my enemy might temporarily serve both our interests. You want to kill vampires. We want Victor dead. Our goals align. For now. Blade considered. Every instinct warned against trusting werewolves, Lycans, whatever they called themselves. They were predators, killers, monsters by any definition. But they were also organized, informed, and clearly invested in seeing the vampires burn. Temporary alliance. Nothing more. Start talking, Blade said. And someone get me a map of this city's sewer system. When the shooting starts, I'll need multiple exit routes. As the Lycans scrambled to gather intelligence, Blade checked his weapons, counted his ammunition, and mentally prepared for what was coming. Somewhere across the city, in a Gothic mansion that had stood for centuries, a vampire elder was learning that the natural order had just been disrupted. Blade intended to make that disruption permanent. The Ordogaz loomed against Budapest's pre-dawn sky like a monument to old-world excess. Gothic spires, reinforced stone walls, windows sealed with UV-resistant shutters that could withstand direct sunlight. The mansion sprawled across 2 city blocks, its underground levels extending even further. A fortress designed by vampires who'd had centuries to perfect their defenses. Blade observed it from a rooftop 3 blocks away, using military-grade binoculars Lucian's people had provided. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten, the first gray promise of sunrise bleeding into the darkness. Perfect timing. Thermal imaging shows at least 80 signatures inside, Reyes said beside him, studying a tablet linked to surveillance equipment the Lycans had positioned over the past year. Most concentrated in the underground levels. Some on the main floor, 6 patrolling the perimeter. Human guards or vampire? Blade asked. Mixed. Humans with assault rifles on the outer perimeter, vampires closer to the building. They're taking your threat seriously, doubled the usual security. Blade lowered the binoculars. The perimeter guards were visible now, human mercenaries in tactical gear, making predictable patrol patterns. Sloppy. They expected an attack to come under cover of darkness, not with the sunrise. Your people in position? Blade asked. Reyes nodded. 3 blocks south, ready to cause noise on your signal. But Lucian wants confirmation, you understand. This is a hit and run, not an occupation. You get in, cause damage, get out. We can't afford a prolonged siege. I don't do sieges, Blade said, securing his weapons. Silver-edged sword on his back, under modified Glocks on his hips, UV grenades on his tactical belt, EDTA serum injectors in forearm sheaths. He'd spent the last 4 hours reviewing Ordogaz schematics, memorizing entry points, mapping escape routes. I do surgical strikes. The sky continued to lighten. 5 minutes to sunrise. Blade pulled out a compact UV lamp, normally used for close-quarters vampire interrogation in his world, and tested it. The focused beam would work as a deterrent if he got cornered. Not as effective as his grenades, but quieter. One more thing, Reyes said, his tone shifting to something more personal. Selene will be in there. She's Victor's favorite, his most loyal killer. If you encounter her, I'll do what needs doing, Blade interrupted. She's not like the others, Reyes continued, ignoring the dismissal. I've fought her for years. She believes in Victor. believes in the Coven's cause. She won't surrender, won't retreat. She'll die before she lets you reach Viktor. Blade looked at him. You sound like you respect her. I respect her skill, Reyes said carefully. Doesn't mean I won't kill her when the opportunity comes. Just be ready. She's faster than the death dealers you fought at the warehouse, stronger than most vampires her age should be. Viktor's trained her personally for centuries. Noted. Blade checked his watch. 3 minutes. His mind flashed back to the warehouse, to the ice-eyed vampire who'd moved like water and fought like a demon. She'd been good, exceptional even. But Blade had fought exceptional before. He'd fought vampire lords who'd lived for millennia, who'd mastered combat styles lost to human history. He'd killed every single one of them. The first edge of sun broke the horizon. Blade felt it immediately. The warmth on his skin, the subtle shift in his enhanced senses, the way his Dhampir physiology responded to genuine daylight. In his world, this was when vampires retreated to their sanctuaries, when the hunt became easier because the prey was confined. Here, it would be a massacre. Signal your people, Blade said. 2 minutes, then I move. Reyes spoke into a radio in Hungarian. Across the city, Lycan teams would be executing their part of the plan. Coordinated attacks on vampire safe houses, supply lines, blood banks. Nothing lethal, just enough noise to split Viktor's attention, to make him wonder if the assault on Ortagaz was a feint rather than the main event. Blade dropped from the rooftop, on landing in an alley with barely a sound. His enhanced hearing picked up the perimeter guard's radio chatter, routine check-ins, bored professionalism. They didn't know what was coming. He moved like a shadow, given purpose, crossing the 3 blocks in under a minute. The first human guard didn't even have time to register the figure in black leather before Blade's hand clamped over his mouth and a pressure point strike rendered him unconscious. Blade lowered him silently, took his radio, and continued. The second guard went down the same way. The third managed to reach for his rifle before Blade's elbow strike collapsed his windpipe. Not lethal. Blade didn't kill humans except in absolute necessity, but effective. The sun was fully visible now, painting Budapest in shades of gold and orange. Blade reached the mansion's eastern wall. According to the schematics, there was a service entrance here used by human staff to bring in supplies. It would be locked, probably monitored, definitely trapped. He pulled out a compact door breacher, another gift from Lucian's surprisingly well-stocked arsenal, and placed the charge. 5 seconds later, the lock blew inward with a muffled crack. Blade was through the door before the sound finished echoing. The service corridor was empty, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. His nose caught the scent immediately. Vampires, multiple signatures, fresh. They'd been through here recently, probably rotating guards. He moved deeper, following the schematic layout in his memory. The main level would have some vampires, those young enough or desperate enough to risk proximity to the upper floors during daylight. But the real concentration would be in the underground levels, where Viktor's inner circle gathered. Footsteps ahead. 2 vampires. Judging by the cadence and weight. Blade pressed against the wall, drawing a knife. Silver-edged, non-reflective black blade. The vampires rounded the corner, both in Death Dealer leathers, both armed with submachine guns. They saw him at the same moment he moved. Blade's knife took the first vampire through the eye socket, piercing deep into the brain. The vampire convulsed, dropped. The second managed to raise his weapon before Blade's other hand caught his wrist, twisted, and the bones snapped like kindling. The vampire opened his mouth to scream. Blade's blade cut across his throat, severing the vocal cords and both carotid arteries. The vampire clutched at the wound, blood pumping between his fingers. In eyes wide with shock that a vampire could move this fast, hit this hard. Both bodies hit the floor within 3 seconds of the encounter beginning. Blade retrieved his knife, wiped it clean, and kept moving. An alarm would trigger soon. Either someone would find the bodies, or the perimeter guards would fail to check in. He had maybe 5 minutes of stealth left before the entire fortress locked down. He reached a stairwell leading down, the underground levels. According to Lucian's intelligence, Viktor's audience chamber was on the 2nd sub-level, a massive Gothic hall where the Elder held court. Blade descended, each step measured and silent. The first sub-level was storage, coffins, blood reserves and medical refrigerators, weapons caches. Blade spotted 3 vampires organizing supplies, their backs to the stairwell. He could slip past them undetected or eliminate them now. He chose elimination. Witnesses complicated extraction. The first vampire died with Blade's silver wire garrote around his throat, the metal cutting through undead flesh like butter. The second spun at the sound, hand reaching for a pistol before Blade's thrown knife embedded itself in his heart. The third managed to draw her weapon, managed to aim. Blade's sword took her head before she could fire. 3 more bodies. 3 more vampires who would never see another sunset. An alarm shrieked to life, red lights flashing throughout the facility. Stealth was over. Blade ran for the 2nd stairwell as reinforcements poured from the deeper levels. He could hear them. Dozens of vampires, death dealers, Viktor's personal guard. The sound of weapons being readied, and of orders being shouted in Hungarian and older languages. He reached the landing between sublevels when they appeared. 10 death dealers, fully armed, forming a firing line. "Open fire!" someone screamed. Blade threw himself back up the stairs as automatic weapons fire shredded the air where he'd been standing. Concrete exploded in clouds of dust, metal ricocheted off stone. He pulled a UV grenade, primed it, and lobbed it down the stairwell. "Grenade!" a death dealer shouted, but not fast enough. The UV detonation lit the stairwell like a miniature sun. Screams filled the corridor as vampire flesh ignited, as undead bodies combusted and disintegrated. When the light faded, ash and smoking equipment were all that remained. But more were coming. Blade could hear them, 30, 40 vampires, converging on his position from multiple directions. Time to introduce himself properly. He holstered his sword and drew both Glocks, loaded with silver hollow points. The first wave of death dealers rounded the corner. Blade put 3 rounds through the leader's chest, 2 through the next vampire's skull, 1 through a third's throat. They dropped like puppets with cut strings. More vampires. Blade moved through them like a scythe through wheat, every shot placed with surgical precision. Headshots, heart shots, anything that would stop them permanently. His enhanced reflexes made their return fire seem slow, predictable. He dodged, weaved, used their own bodies as shields. A vampire leapt from above, dropping from an air duct with claws extended. Blade caught the attacker's wrist mid-strike, twisted, and used the vampire's momentum to slam him into the wall hard enough to crack stone. A follow-up strike with his elbow caved in the vampire's skull. 10 seconds, 12 kills. "Fall back," someone with authority shouted. "Seal the 2nd level. Don't let him reach Viktor." Too late for that. Blade vaulted over the pile of bodies, hit the 2nd sub-level corridor at a run. The massive ornate doors to Viktor's audience chamber were ahead, flanked by 6 vampires in ceremonial armor. Viktor's personal guard, the elite among elites. They didn't bother with guns. They drew swords, ancient blades that had tasted blood for centuries. Blade's respect for them went up marginally. At least they'd die like warriors. The first guard came at him with a European longsword technique, fast and precise. Blade parried, riposted, and then his silver blade opened the vampire's throat in a spray of black blood. The second and third attacked simultaneously from different angles. Classic pincer movement. Blade dropped low, let their blades pass over his head, and swept the legs out from under one, while driving his sword up through the second sternum. He yanked the blade free, spun, and decapitated the fallen vampire before he could recover. The remaining 3 guards attacked together, coordinated, professional. For 30 seconds, the corridor was a blur of steel and superhuman speed. Blade took a cut across his shoulder, shallow, but it burned silver poisoning. He ignored it, pressed his advantage, and systematically dismantled their defense. When the last guard's head hit the floor, Blade stood alone before Victor's chamber doors, breathing hard, on blood, his and theirs, dripping from his coat. He kicked the doors open. The audience chamber was exactly what Lucian's schematics had promised. A Gothic cathedral underground, with vaulted ceilings, stone pillars, and a raised dais at the far end. On that dais sat a throne, and on that throne sat Viktor. The vampire elder looked exactly like something from a nightmare. Ancient, powerful, with the bearing of someone who'd ruled nations and toppled kingdoms. His eyes fixed on Blade with the intensity of a predator recognizing a genuine threat. "So," Viktor said, voice smooth as silk and cold as winter, "the Daywalker comes to my house uninvited. How very bold." Blade raised his sword, blood still dripping from the blade. "You wanted to meet me. Here I am." Viktor stood, and even that simple movement radiated power. "I have questions, Hunter, beginning with, what are you?" "I'm the thing that kills things like you," Blade replied. "That's all you need to know." Viktor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then let us see if your legend matches your arrogance." He gestured, and from the shadows behind the pillars, they emerged. 20 more death dealers, including the ice-eyed woman from the warehouse, Selene, now healed and armed for war. Blade's grip tightened on his sword. This was about to get interesting. Selene stepped forward from the formation of death dealers, her movements deliberate and controlled. The broken ribs from their warehouse encounter were healed, vampire regeneration at work. But Blade could see the calculation in her eyes. She'd underestimated him once. She wouldn't make that mistake again. 23 vampires dead in under 10 minutes, Viktor said, descending the dais steps with measured grace. "My personal guard slaughtered. My fortress infiltrated during daylight hours, something that hasn't happened in 6 centuries. He stopped halfway down, studying Blade like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "I confess, I'm impressed, and deeply curious." "Curiosity's going to get you killed," Blade said. Viktor's laugh was genuine. "Threats from someone surrounded and outnumbered. You have spine, and I'll grant you that. But spine alone won't save you from..." Blade's gun was in his hand, and firing before Viktor finished the sentence. 3 silver rounds, perfectly aimed at the elder's head. Viktor moved, not quite fast enough. One bullet grazed his temple, drawing black blood. The other 2 missed as he blurred to the side with speed that made the other death dealers look slow. The elder's face shifted from amused curiosity to cold fury. "Seline, take him alive if possible, dead if necessary." "With pleasure," Seline said, drawing matched pistols. The death dealers attacked as a coordinated unit, half laying down suppressing fire while the other half moved to flank. Military tactics, centuries of experience, overwhelming firepower. Blade was already moving. He vaulted behind a stone pillar as bullets chewed into the ancient stone. Yon then came out low and fast, targeting the death dealers who'd broken formation to flank. His sword took the first one's legs out from under him, a crippling strike, not immediately fatal. The vampire went down screaming. Blade used the falling body as a shield against the next volley of gunfire, then threw a UV grenade into the largest cluster of attackers. The detonation turned 4 death dealers into ash and fire. But Selene was on him before the light faded, moving with a speed and precision that separated her from the cannon fodder. She fired twice, both shots aimed not where Blade was, but where he'd be. He twisted mid-dodge, felt one bullet tear through his coat, the other nick his ear. She was reading his movements, predicting his patterns. Good, dangerous. Blade holstered his gun and drew his second sword, a backup blade, slightly shorter, equally sharp. Dual wielding against a vampire who'd been fighting for centuries was risky, but it gave him options. Seline came at him with a combination of gunfire and martial arts, shooting to control his movement, then closing for devastating strikes when she forced him into defensive positions. She was better than the warehouse fight had suggested. Much better. Their blades met with a ring of steel. She was strong, not as strong as Blade, but strong enough that she could deflect rather than absorb his strikes. Her technique was European fencing mixed with something older, something that predated modern martial arts. "You fight like you've done this before," Selene said, breathing hard as they circled. "Like you've killed our kind many times." "More than you can count," Blade replied. He feinted left, struck right, and then opened a cut across her shoulder. She hissed, but didn't slow. "Then you know we don't die easily." "I'm aware." 6 more death dealers tried to rush him while Selene held his attention. Blade saw them coming in his peripheral vision. 3 from the left, 3 from the right. Classic pincer. He waited until they were committed, then dropped flat. The death dealers' gunfire crossed paths, hitting each other. 2 went down immediately. Blade swept Selene's legs out from under her, rolled, and came up throwing a knife that took one of the surviving death dealers through the eye. But Viktor wasn't just watching anymore. The elder moved like a force of nature, one moment on the dais, the next beside Blade, a backhand strike that carried 1,000 years of accumulated strength. And it caught Blade in the ribs and sent him flying across the chamber. He crashed through a decorative table, rolled to absorb the impact, and came up coughing. Cracked ribs. Maybe 2, maybe 3. His healing would handle it, but it would take time he didn't have. Viktor followed up instantly, closing the distance with terrifying speed. His hand caught Blade's throat, lifting him off the ground with inhuman strength. "You're strong," Viktor said conversationally, as if he wasn't currently choking the life out of someone. "But strength alone doesn't make you invincible. I've killed thousands of warriors. You're just one more." Blade's hand went to his forearm sheath, pulled an EDTA injector, anticoagulant serum designed to poison vampire blood. He jammed it into Viktor's wrist and depressed the plunger. Viktor's eyes went wide. He dropped Blade and staggered back, clutching his wrist as the serum entered his bloodstream. What is this?" "Chemistry," Blade gasped, massaging his throat. "Your blood's clotting wrong now. Give it a minute, you'll start feeling weak, dizzy. Another 5 minutes, you'll be too weak to stand." Viktor snarled, but Blade could already see the poison working. The elder's movements were fractionally slower, his coordination slightly off. Selene was back on her feet, and she'd seen what happened. "Death dealers, Protect the Elder. Get him to the medical chamber now." 4 death dealers surrounded Victor, beginning to escort him toward a side exit. The rest formed a barrier between Blade and their retreating master. Blade counted quickly. 12 death dealers still standing, including Selene. His ribs were screaming. He'd used 2 of his 4 UV grenades, and he'd just poisoned but not killed a vampire elder who would recover eventually. Time to adjust tactics. He pulled his last smoke grenade, standard issue, no UV, and deployed it. Thick gray smoke filled the chamber within seconds, reducing visibility to near 0. The death dealers switched to thermal imaging, or tried to. But Blade's body temperature was closer to human than vampire. His Dhampir nature made him harder to distinguish in the smoke. He moved through the chaos, targeting death dealers with brutal efficiency. A vampire emerged from the smoke to his left. Blade's elbow caved in his windpipe. Another attacked from behind. Blade spun, his blade opening the vampire's stomach. A third managed to get a shot off, the bullet grazing Blade's thigh, before Blade's return strike took her arm off at the elbow. Selene's voice cut through the chaos. "Infrared strobes, now." Lights flashed through the smoke, disorienting pulses designed to overwhelm enhanced vision. Blade's eyes watered, his senses momentarily scrambled. A death dealer took advantage, driving a silver dagger into Blade's shoulder. The silver burned like fire. Blade roared, grabbed the death dealer's head, and twisted hard enough to snap the vampire's neck. He yanked the dagger free, felt his regeneration already working to counter the silver poisoning. But it slowed him. The smoke was clearing. 8 death dealers left, including Seline. Viktor was gone, evacuated to some deeper level where he could recover from the EDTA serum. Blade's tactical assessment was clear. He'd accomplished the primary objective, proved he could infiltrate Victor's fortress, kill his guards, and wound the Elder himself. But staying to finish the fight would likely get him killed. 8 veteran death dealers, plus whatever reinforcements were en route, versus 1 wounded Dhampir with limited ammunition and 2 UV grenades left. Time to extract. He pulled a UV grenade, held it up so Selene could see. "Back off, or I cook all of you." Selene's expression didn't change. "You're wounded, outnumbered, and running out of tricks. Surrender. Victor might let you live for study." "Not my style," Blade said. He primed the grenade. "You'll die here," Selene warned. "Maybe." Blade smiled coldly. "But I'll take half of you with me. You willing to make that trade?" For 3 seconds, and the standoff held. Then Selene made a decision Blade didn't expect. She lowered her weapon. "Stand down," she ordered the death dealers. "What?" one of them protested. "Selene, he nearly killed Victor. And if we press him, he'll detonate that grenade and kill half of us before we bring him down." Selene interrupted, her eyes never leaving Blade. "Victor is wounded but alive. We've identified the threat. Letting him leave now means we can track him, study him, find his weaknesses." Her tone shifted, became colder. "And kill him on our terms, not his." Smart. Ruthlessly smart. Blade backed toward the chamber entrance, grenade still armed. "Your elder asked what I am. Tell him I'm what happens when vampires forget they're not invincible. Tell him I'm coming back, and tell him next time I won't miss." He reached the doorway. He threw the UV grenade back into the chamber, not to kill, but to cover his escape, and ran. The death dealers scattered from the UV burst, giving Blade precious seconds. He sprinted through the corridors, following his memorized escape route. Alarms shrieked, security doors slammed shut. But Blade had planned for this. He reached a ventilation shaft, kicked the grate open, and climbed. The shaft led upward, toward the ground level, toward daylight. Behind him, He could hear pursuit. Vampires who were willing to risk proximity to the upper levels, who wanted him badly enough to chance sunlight exposure. Blade emerged on the mansion's second floor, crashed through a UV-shielded window, and landed in the courtyard as full morning sunlight bathed Budapest. The pursuing vampires hit the sunlight and ignited instantly, like their screams cut short as they disintegrated. Blade kept running, vaulting the outer wall, disappearing into the Budapest streets as sirens wailed in the distance. Human authorities responding to the gunfire and explosions. They'd find a Gothic mansion, signs of violence, but no bodies that lasted longer than ash. 3 blocks away, a nondescript van pulled alongside him. The door slid open, revealing rays. "Get in!" the Lycan shouted. Blade dove into the van, and it peeled away as the door slammed shut. Inside, Lucian sat monitoring multiple screens, showing feeds from around the city. "Did you get him?" Lucian asked. "Wounded him. Poisoned him with EDTA. He'll recover, but he'll be weak for a few days." Blade pulled the silver dagger from his shoulder with a grunt, tossed it aside. "I killed maybe 30 of his people, including his personal guard. The fortress knows I can penetrate their defenses, and Viktor knows he's not safe even in his own house." Lucian smiled, savage and satisfied. "Then you've accomplished more in one morning than we have in a decade of guerrilla warfare." "Don't celebrate yet," Blade said, pulling out his remaining equipment to inventory losses. "That death dealer, Selene, she let me go. That wasn't mercy. That was strategy. She's planning something." "Selene's always planning something," Reyes muttered. "She's Viktor's favorite for a reason." The van merged into morning traffic, just another vehicle in a city waking to a new day. Behind them, the Ordogas was in chaos. Death dealers scrambling, Viktor wounded and furious, and the entire vampire power structure reeling from an attack they'd thought impossible. Blade checked his weapons, mentally cataloging what he'd learned. This universe's vampires were organized, disciplined, and dangerous. But they had the same fundamental weaknesses: silver, UV light, and arrogance. He'd exploited all 3 today. "Where are we going?" Blade asked. "Safe house on the outskirts," Lucian replied. "We need to debrief, plan next moves, and..." He paused, looking at a screen. "And we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Lucian turned the screen toward Blade. It showed news footage, human news, broadcast television. The reporter was standing outside the Ordogas, emergency vehicles in the background, talking rapidly in Hungarian. "What's she saying?" Blade asked. "Terrorist attack," Lucian translated. "Multiple explosions, gunfire, possible hostage situation. And the authorities are calling it organized crime." He switched to another feed, this one showing grainy security footage. "But this is what concerns me." The footage showed Blade, his face partially visible, fighting death dealers in the mansion corridors. "The vampires control most media outlets," Lucian said quietly. "If they let this footage leak to human authorities, if they identify you, they'll make me human law enforcement's problem too." Blade finished. "Smart. Can't hunt me during the day, so they'll let human police do it for them." "Exactly." Lucian closed the screens. "You've started a war, Blade. And it's not just with vampires anymore." Blade leaned back, feeling his ribs already beginning to knit themselves together, the silver burn in his shoulder fading as his enhanced healing worked. "I've been at war my whole life, and adding a few more enemies to the list doesn't change anything." But even as he said it, he knew the game had shifted. This wasn't his world, with familiar territories and known enemies. This was a chessboard with pieces he was still learning to recognize. And somewhere in the depths of Ortegas, Viktor was recovering, planning, and preparing to show the Daywalker exactly why he'd ruled unchallenged for 1,000 years. The war had begun. The safe house was a converted warehouse in Budapest's industrial district, all concrete, steel, and paranoia. Blade sat on a medical table while a Lycan medic named Soren worked on extracting silver fragments from his shoulder wound. The Dampir's healing factor was already pushing foreign material out, but the silver slowed the process, made it burn. "Hold still," Soren muttered, using tweezers to pull another fragment free. "You heal fast, but not fast enough to make this painless." Blade didn't flinch. He'd endured worse. "How long until I'm operational?" "At your regeneration rate? 2 hours for full mobility, maybe 4 before the silver toxicity completely clears." Soren dropped the fragment into a metal dish with a clink. "You're lucky. Normal vampire would be convulsing by now with this much silver in their system." "I'm not a normal vampire," Blade said flatly. Across the warehouse floor, Lucian stood with Reyes and 3 other Lycan lieutenants, reviewing tactical displays and monitoring vampire communications they'd intercepted. The atmosphere was tense, not hostile, but charged with the energy of people who knew they'd just kicked a hornet's nest. Blade's enhanced hearing picked up their conversation despite the distance. "Coven's in full lockdown," one lieutenant was saying. "Every death dealer squad recalled, every safe house fortified. They're not just defensive, they're terrified." "Viktor's never been wounded in combat," another added. "Not in living memory. The psychological impact alone will make him more dangerous, not less," Lucian interrupted. "Wounded pride makes tyrants reckless. He'll want Blade's head on a pike to restore his image of invincibility." "Let him try," Reyes growled. "The Daywalker proved Viktor bleeds. That changes everything." Blade tuned them out, focusing on his own tactical assessment. The raid had accomplished its goals, demonstrated his capabilities, wounded Viktor, and established that the vampire's fortress wasn't impregnable. But it had also revealed limitations. The EDTA serum worked on these vampires, which was valuable intelligence, but he'd barely escaped. 23 confirmed kills against an organization that numbered in the hundreds, possibly thousands. Attrition warfare wouldn't work here. He needed a different strategy. "Finished," Soren announced, stepping back. "Try to avoid getting stabbed with silver for the next few hours. Your body needs time to purge the toxicity." Blade rotated his shoulder, testing the range of motion. Stiff, but functional. "Noted." Lucian approached, carrying a tablet. "We need to talk about what happens next." "I'm listening." Viktor's response is unfolding as we speak. Lucian pulled up intercepted communications. He's authorized something called a blood hunt, essentially a kill-on-sight order for you throughout Budapest. Every death dealer, every vampire in the city, is now actively searching for the Daywalker. They've also leaked your description to human law enforcement, claiming you're a terrorist. Blade scanned the communications. Military-grade encryption, but the Lycans had cracked it. "How long have you been able to read their messages?" 6 months. One of our people infiltrated their communications network. Lucian's expression was grim. "It's how we've survived this long, knowing where they'll strike before they strike." "And they don't know you've compromised them?" "Not yet. We're careful about how we use the intelligence, make it look like lucky guesses or good fieldcraft." Lucian zoomed in on a particular message. "But this is the concerning part. Viktor Zhao Juan, summoning Amelia." Blade's eyes narrowed. "Who's Amelia?" "Another elder. One of the 3 who rule the covens in rotation. Lucian pulled up a file showing a severe-looking woman with aristocratic features. Victor, Marcus, and Amelia take turns ruling while the other two sleep in hibernation. It maintains continuity of leadership and prevents anyone elder from accumulating too much power. Right now, Victor rules while the others sleep. But he's waking her up early, Blade said, understanding immediately. Because he needs reinforcements. More than that, he needs to consolidate power, show strength, prove he's still in control despite what you did to him. Lucian closed the file. When Amelia wakes, you won't be facing one elder. You'll be facing two, each with centuries of experience, each commanding their own faction of death dealers. Blade considered that. Two ancient vampires, both likely as strong as Viktor, both motivated to eliminate the threat he represented. When does she wake? Normally, not for another 3 months. But Viktor's accelerating the process. Our intelligence suggests she'll be revived within 48 hours. Then I have 48 hours to either kill Viktor or find a way out of this universe. Lucian studied him. You're still planning to leave, even after what you've started here? I'm not from your world, Blade said simply. This isn't my fight. You made it your fight the moment you killed 23 vampires in Viktor's house, Reyes interjected, walking over. You think they'll just let you, Dimension, hop away? They'll hunt you across realities if they have to. Let them try. Blade stood, testing his legs. The silver toxicity was fading faster than Soren had predicted. I've been hunted before. I'm still here. They're not. Arrogance, Lucian said quietly, is what got Viktor wounded. Don't make his mistakes. Blade met the Lycan leader's eyes. And it's not arrogance, it's experience. I've fought vampires who could level cities, vampire lords who commanded armies, ancient bloodlines that made Viktor look like a rookie. I've killed them all. Your elder is strong, organized, and dangerous. But he's not the worst thing I've faced. Then what is? Reyes asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. Myself, Blade said. Every day I wake up, I fight the thirst, the hunger, the part of me that wants to give in, become what I hunt. That's the real enemy. Viktor's just another monster on the list. Silence fell across the warehouse. Lucian was the first to break it. You're more complicated than I initially assessed. Most people are. Blade walked to the weapons table where his gear was laid out for cleaning and repair. Now, you said you wanted to talk about what happens next. I assume you have a proposal. A partnership, Lucian said. Temporary, but mutually beneficial. You want to survive until you find a way home. We want Viktor dead and the Coven's power structure shattered. Our goals align. You tried this pitch already, Blade reminded him. I helped with the Ordogaz raid. What more are you asking? Sustained cooperation, intelligence sharing, coordinated strikes, resource pooling. Lucian pulled up a map of Budapest on his tablet, marked with red and blue indicators. Red markers are vampire holdings, safe houses, blood banks, storage facilities. Blue markers are our positions. You hit Ordogaz hard, but you only scratch the surface. Viktor's network spans this entire city with connections to covens across Europe. You want me to help you fight a continent-wide vampire conspiracy? Blade said. In exchange for what exactly? Information, Lucian replied. We have resources you don't, local knowledge, communications intercepts, networks of informants. You're powerful, but you're also blind. You don't know this city, don't know vampire territory from neutral ground, don't know which humans are collaborators and which are innocent. Blade had to admit the logic was sound. He'd been operating on instinct and improvisation since arriving. Having actual intelligence would make him more effective. And when Viktor's dead? Blade asked. What stops you from deciding I'm the next threat that needs eliminating? Nothing, Lucian said honestly. Except that I've spent 600 years fighting vampires, and I know the difference between a monster and a warrior. You kill vampires, Blade. You don't enslave species. You don't build empires on suffering. Don't treat other beings as livestock. That makes you someone I can work with, even if I can't fully trust you. At least you're honest about it. Honesty is cheaper than betrayal, Lucian said. Betrayal requires planning, resources, and timing. Right now, we need you more than we need to plot against you. Reyes snorted. That was almost diplomatic, Lucian. Almost. Lucian extended his hand to Blade. So, do we have an arrangement? Blade looked at the offered hand. Every instinct still screamed that Lycans were monsters, predators, things that should be hunted. But they were also organized, informed, and currently useful. He shook Lucian's hand. Temporary alliance. I help you hit Viktor's infrastructure. You provide intelligence and support. When I find a way home, we part ways, on no strings. Agreed, Lucian said. A Lycan at the communication station suddenly stood, urgency in his posture. Lucian, priority intercept. You need to hear this. Lucian crossed to the station, Blade following. The communications officer played an audio file. Viktor's voice, weak but still commanding, speaking in rapid Hungarian with occasional English phrases. Lucian's expression darkened as he listened. When the message ended, he turned to Blade. Viktor's not waiting for Amelia. He's calling in Craven. Who's Craven? Blade asked. Viktor's regent, his second in command, responsible for Coven operations when Viktor's unavailable. Lucian pulled up another file, a handsome vampire with aristocratic features and calculating eyes. Ambitious, ruthless, and politically savvy. He's been consolidating power for decades and waiting for his chance to move up the hierarchy. And Viktor just gave him that chance, Blade observed, by appearing weak. Exactly. Craven will use this as an opportunity. Publicly, he'll hunt you to prove his loyalty. Privately, he'll be maneuvering to replace Viktor as elder. Reyes grinned viciously. So we've got internal vampire politics working in our favor. Viktor wounded, Craven ambitious, and the Coven fighting itself while trying to fight us. It's not that simple, Lucian warned. Craven's ambitious, but he's not stupid. He won't move against Viktor until he's certain of victory, which means he needs to eliminate the external threat first, Blade finished. Me. I'm the wild card that makes vampire politics unstable. If Craven wants to challenge Viktor, he needs me dead so the Coven can focus on internal power struggles. Precisely. Lucian pulled up tactical maps, which means Craven will come at you with everything he has, not to defend Viktor, but to remove an obstacle to his own ambitions. Blade checked his weapons, his mind already working through scenarios. How good is he? In combat? Competent but not exceptional. In tactics and strategy? Extremely dangerous. He's survived centuries of vampire court politics by being smarter than his enemies, not stronger. So he'll use proxies, ambushes, traps. Won't face me directly unless he has overwhelming advantage. That would be my assessment. Blade considered the new variable. A vampire power struggle, with him caught in the middle. In his own world, he'd learned to exploit vampire politics. Let them fight each other, and then kill whoever won. But he didn't have time for long-term manipulation here. He needed quick, decisive action. Where would Craven be right now? Blade asked. Lucian checked his intercepts. based on communications traffic, one of the Coven's administrative centers, a converted office building in the financial district. It's where they coordinate operations, manage resources, plan strikes. How many vampires? 30 to 40 at any given time. Mix of administrators, guards, and whatever death dealers Craven keeps as personal security. And defenses? Standard UV shielding, reinforced entrances, probably heavy weapons. But nothing like Ordogas. Lucian's eyes narrowed. You're thinking about hitting it. I'm thinking about cutting the head off the snake before it grows back, Blade said. Viktor's wounded. Craven's distracted with power plays, and their organization is in chaos. This is the moment to strike before they consolidate. It's also the moment they'll expect you to strike, Reyes pointed out. They'll have anticipated exactly this logic. Which is why I won't hit Craven's headquarters. Blade pointed to a different location on the map, a red marker labeled Blood Processing Facility Number 3. I'll hit their logistics. Can't fight a war without resources. Lucian smiled slowly. The blood banks. They need human blood to survive, to maintain their strength. You destroy their supply, they weaken, get desperate, start making mistakes. Blade traced routes on the map. How many facilities in Budapest? 5 major ones, plus a dozen smaller distribution points. Then we hit them all, simultaneously if possible, sequentially if not. Blade looked at Lucian. How many teams can you field? For coordinated strikes? Maybe 4 teams of 5 Lycans each. We can handle the smaller targets. Good. I'll take the main facility, the one with the heaviest security. You and your teams hit the others. We coordinate timing, strike at the same moment, and by sunrise tomorrow, Viktor's coven is rationing blood like survivors in a siege. Reyes was nodding, clearly appreciating the strategy. Starve them out. Force them to expose themselves hunting for blood. Pick them off when they're weak and desperate. Exactly. Lucian studied the map, running calculations. It's risky. We'll be exposing multiple teams simultaneously. If even one strike fails, and if they triangulate our positions, then you'll know whether your people are as good as you think they are, Blade said. War is risk. You either accept it or you've already lost. For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Then he nodded. We'll need 6 hours to position teams, gather equipment, and coordinate timing. Can you be ready by tonight? Blade checked his shoulder. The wound was almost healed, the silver toxicity nearly gone. I can be ready in 2 hours. Use the extra 4 to make sure your people don't screw this up. Confident, Reyes muttered. Realistic, Blade corrected. I've run operations like this before. The hardest part isn't the combat, it's the coordination. One team jumps early or late, the whole plan collapses. Lucian seemed to accept that. Then we have work to do. Reyes, start assembling teams. Singe, pull schematics on all 5 facilities. The rest of you, weapons check and equipment staging. He turned back to Blade. You'll hit Blood Processing Facility Number 3, the main one. It's their largest operation, most heavily defended. If you can't take it down. I can take it down, Blade said with absolute certainty. Question is whether your people can handle their targets. We've been fighting vampires for 600 years, Lucian replied. We'll manage. As the Lycans mobilized, Blade returned to his gear, methodically cleaning and reloading weapons. His mind was already in the zone, that focused state where everything else fell away except the mission, the target, the kill. Somewhere in Budapest, Viktor was recovering, Craven was scheming, and Amelia was being prepared for early awakening. The vampire power structure was fracturing, showing cracks. Blade intended to drive a wedge into those cracks and shatter the whole edifice. The blood hunt had been declared on him. It was time to return the favor. Blood Processing Facility Number 3 occupied a converted pharmaceutical plant on the Danube's industrial waterfront. 5 stories of reinforced concrete and steel, with loading docks designed for discreet nighttime deliveries. According to Lucian's intelligence, the facility processed approximately 40% of the Coven's blood supply, donated, stolen, and harvested from willing human collaborators who sold their blood for money they'd never live long enough to spend. Blade watched it from across the river, using night vision binoculars to count guards and map patrol patterns. Sunset had been 2 hours ago. The facility was fully operational now, trucks arriving and departing, vampires and human workers moving between buildings. Mistel Thermal shows 63 signatures inside. Lucian's voice said through the earpiece Blade had reluctantly agreed to wear. 42 are concentrated in the processing center, 2nd and 3rd floors. The rest are scattered across security posts and administrative offices. Human ratio? Blade asked. Maybe 30% human workers, the rest vampire. Most of the humans are on the lower floors. The vampires don't trust them near the storage levels. Made sense. Human collaborators were useful but expendable. The vampires would keep them away from anything critical. Blade checked his watch. Status on other teams? Team 1 is in position at Facility Number 7, South District. Team 2 has eyes on the Pest Distribution Center. Team 3 is ready to hit the Buddha warehouse. Team 4 is standing by at the medical storage depot. A pause, which we're ready on your signal. 5 minutes, Blade said. I need to neutralize perimeter security first. He collapsed the binoculars and moved, crossing the river via a maintenance bridge that predated modern surveillance systems. The facility's security was focused on the main approaches, roads, loading docks, the primary entrance. They weren't expecting someone to come from the river. First mistake. Blade reached the facility's eastern wall, where shadow from the adjacent building provided cover. 2 guards on this side, both vampires, both armed with submachine guns. They were talking, relaxed, clearly not expecting trouble. Second mistake. Blade scaled the wall in silence, his enhanced strength making the climb trivial. He reached the roof access, crouched low, and waited for the guards to make their next patrol pass. When they rounded the corner, Blade dropped behind them. Wire garrote around the first guard's throat, silver cutting through undead flesh. The vampire managed one strangled gasp before his head separated from his body. The second guard spun, weapon rising. Blade's thrown knife took him through the eye socket, penetrating deep into the brain. The vampire dropped without firing a shot. 2 down, Blade whispered into the comm. Proceeding to entry point. The roof access was locked, but Blade's lockpicks made short work of it. He entered the stairwell, descended 1 floor, and found himself in the administrative level. Offices, filing cabinets, computers still running. A vampire clerk looked up from her desk as Blade entered, mouth opening to scream. His hand clamped over her mouth, his other hand driving a silver stake through her heart. She disintegrated into ash, leaving only her clothes behind. Blade moved through the administrative level like death itself, eliminating every vampire he encountered with ruthless efficiency. No alarms, no warnings, just silent kills and ash. The human workers he left unconscious, pressure point strikes that would keep them out for hours. By the time he reached the processing center entrance, he'd killed 11 vampires without triggering a single alert. I'm at the main target, Blade reported. 60 seconds, then we go loud. Confirmed, Lucian replied. All teams ready. Blade pulled out his remaining UV grenades, 3 left after the Ordogaz raid, and rigged them to a timer. 60 seconds. He set them just inside the processing center doors, not where the blast radius would catch the maximum number of vampires. Then he moved to an observation window overlooking the processing floor. Below, vampires worked with industrial efficiency. Blood collection stations, refrigeration units, packaging systems. Human blood treated like a commodity, processed and distributed to sustain an aristocracy of parasites. Blade's jaw tightened. This was what vampires did when they organized. When they stopped being individual predators and became a system, they industrialized suffering. The timer hit 0. 3 UV grenades detonated simultaneously, flooding the processing center with lethal radiation. Vampires caught in the blast radius ignited instantly, their screams echoing through the facility. Those outside the immediate blast area scrambled for cover, or confusion and panic replacing disciplined order. "All teams, execute!" Blade commanded into the comm. Across Budapest, 4 Lycan strike teams hit their targets simultaneously. Explosions rippled through the night as vampire blood facilities went up in flames. Blade kicked through the observation window, dropping into the processing center amid chaos and burning vampires. His guns were in his hands instantly, silver rounds punching through vampire skulls with mechanical precision. A death dealer emerged from cover, firing a burst from his submachine gun. Blade twisted, felt bullets pass close enough to ruffle his coat, and put 3 rounds through the death dealer's chest. The vampire staggered, tried to raise his weapon again. Blade's sword took his head. "Intruder on the processing floor," someone shouted. "It's the Daywalker. All security to processing now." Exactly what Blade wanted. Concentrate the defenders, make them predictable, then slaughter them. A dozen vampires poured through the eastern entrance, weapons raised. Blade threw his last smoke grenade, filling the processing center with thick gray clouds. The vampires fired blindly, bullets ricocheting off industrial equipment. Blade moved through the smoke like a ghost, his enhanced senses tracking each vampire by sound and scent. A vampire stumbled into his path. Blade's knife opened his throat. Another tried to flank. Blade's boot caught him in the knee with bone-breaking force. Then his sword finished the job. The smoke began to clear. Blade had killed 7 of the 12 vampires who'd entered. The remaining 5 had taken cover behind refrigeration units, being smart enough to recognize they were outmatched in close quarters. "Suppressant foam," one of them shouted. "Deploy suppressant foam." Blade saw the canister too late. A vampire tossed it into the center of the room. It detonated, releasing expanding fire-suppressant foam designed to smother flames and coat surfaces. Within seconds, the entire processing floor was covered in thick white foam that clung to everything, including Blade's weapons. The foam was chemical-resistant, designed to withstand extreme temperatures. It gummed up his gun mechanisms, made his sword grip slippery, reduced his mobility. Clever. Vampires who'd survived centuries didn't do it by being stupid. "He's slowed," a death dealer shouted. "Converge and take him down." The 5 remaining vampires rushed him simultaneously, abandoning firearms for close quarters combat. They'd correctly assessed that in foam-covered terrain, speed and numbers were their advantage. Blade met their charge with brutal directness. He couldn't quick draw in the foam, couldn't rely on fluid weapon transitions. So he adapted. The first vampire came at him high. Blade ducked under the attack, grabbed the vampire's arm, and used his momentum to slam him face first into a steel support beam. Skull cracked, body went limp. The second and third attacked together, trying to grapple. Blade took an elbow to the ribs, his still healing ribs, and grunted in pain. But pain was just information. He drove his forehead into the second vampire's nose with a headbutt that shattered bone, then twisted free and threw the vampire into his companion. The fourth vampire was smarter, hanging back, looking for an opening. When Blade turned to face the fifth attacker, the fourth rushed his blind side with a silver dagger. Blade sensed it more than saw it. The subtle displacement of air, the smell of silver. He twisted, but not quite fast enough. The dagger scored a line across his back, through leather and skin. Silver burned like acid. Blade roared, grabbed the fourth vampire by the throat, and lifted him off the ground one-handed. "Bad idea," he said, then slammed the vampire down with enough force to crack the concrete floor beneath the foam. The fifth vampire, the one who'd been hanging back, made his move. He lunged for the alarm panel on the far wall, clearly deciding that bringing reinforcements was smarter than dying heroically. Blade's thrown knife caught him between the shoulder blades. The vampire stumbled, crashed into the alarm panel, and then slid down the wall, leaving a trail of black blood. Silence fell across the processing center except for Blade's heavy breathing and the hiss of damaged refrigeration units. "Processing center secure," Blade reported into the comm, yanking his knife free from the dead vampire. "Status on other targets?" "Team 1 successful, facility destroyed," Lucian replied. "Team 2 encountered heavy resistance but completed objective. Team 3, we've lost contact." Blade's instincts flared. "How long?" 4 minutes. They should have reported by now." "Trap," Blade said immediately. "Pull Team 3 back if you can raise them. If not, assume they're compromised." "Already trying." "Team 4, accelerate your timeline and extract immediately after objective completion. We may have..." Static erupted across the comm channel. "Lucian?" Blade tried. Nothing. "Raise? Anyone?" The communication system was dead. Blade was moving before he finished processing the implications. Someone had jammed the frequencies, cut the Lycans' coordination. That meant someone had anticipated the coordinated strikes, had planned for them. Craven had to be. Viktor was wounded. Selene was competent but direct. Only Craven had the political cunning to predict this move and prepare a counter. Which meant this entire operation might be. The facility's emergency lighting died, plunging everything into darkness. Red emergency lights kicked in a moment later, casting everything in crimson. Then Blade heard it. Movement, lots of it. Tactical boots on concrete, weapons being readied. Coordinated approach from multiple directions. He'd been wrong about the facility's guard count. 63 signatures. But thermal imaging didn't distinguish between vampires actively working and vampires waiting in UV-shielded bunkers, ready to deploy. The facility hadn't been lightly defended. It had been bait. "Welcome, Daywalker," a smooth, aristocratic voice said over the facility's PA system. "Craven. I must confess, you've exceeded my expectations. Viktor said you were dangerous, but I didn't quite believe him until I reviewed the Ordogaz footage. Impressive work." Blade said nothing, scanning for exits, counting approaching hostiles by sound. At least 40. Too many to fight directly, especially with his weapons foam-covered and his back still burning from silver poisoning. "I want you to know this isn't personal," Craven continued. "In fact, I rather admire what you've accomplished. But you're an obstacle to necessary change, and obstacles must be removed. My death dealers will kill you now. Please understand, it's just business." The first wave hit from 3 directions simultaneously. 20 death dealers, military coordination, overwhelming firepower. Blade dove behind industrial equipment as bullets chewed through the air where he'd been standing. He needed to move, needed to find a defensive position or escape route. But the death dealers were professionals. They advanced in formation, covering each other's angles, systematically eliminating his options. A death dealer rounded the equipment from his left. Blade's fist caught him under the jaw with enough force to snap his neck. But the momentary exposure drew fire from 3 other directions. Blade felt a bullet tear through his shoulder, another graze his thigh. He was being corralled, pushed toward the facility's center where they could surround him completely. Classic kill box tactics. Blade made a decision. Can't win this fight on their terms. Change the battlefield. He ran for the refrigeration units, massive industrial coolers containing processed blood. His sword was still foam-covered, but the blade was sharp enough. He drove it into the nearest unit's coolant line. Liquid nitrogen sprayed out under pressure, flash-freezing everything it touched. The temperature in the processing center dropped 30 degrees in 10 seconds. Vampires caught in the spray screamed as their flesh froze solid. Blade used the chaos to move, vaulting over equipment, heading for the loading dock. If he could reach... A vampire dropped from the ceiling directly onto him, driving them both to the ground. And this one was stronger than the others, faster. Elite guard. Blade took an elbow to the face, tasted blood, his own blood. They grappled, superhuman strength against superhuman strength. The vampire got his hands around Blade's throat, started crushing. Blade couldn't breathe, couldn't break the hold, his vision starting to tunnel. He stopped trying to break the hold. Instead, he grabbed the vampire's head with both hands and twisted with everything he had. The vampire's neck snapped with a sound like breaking timber. The body went limp, released him. Blade gasped, sucking in air, rolled to his feet. More death dealers were closing in, cutting off the loading dock exit. The only way out was up. He ran for the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time. Behind him, death dealers pursued, firing as they ran. Bullets sparked off metal railings, punched through walls. One caught Blade in the calf, nearly took his leg out from under him. He kept running. 4th floor, 5th floor, roof access. Blade burst through the roof door into open air. Budapest's lights sprawled before him, the Danube glittering in the darkness. Beautiful, indifferent to the violence below. The roof offered no cover, nowhere to hide, just open space and the long drop to the street below. Death dealers poured through the roof access, weapons raised. Blade counted 15. More were coming up the stairs. Blade walked to the roof's edge, turned to face them. His weapons were damaged, his ammunition depleted, his body carrying multiple gunshot wounds and silver poisoning. The odds were impossible. He smiled anyway. "Craven," he shouted toward the nearest camera. "And you wanted to remove an obstacle. Here's your chance. Send your people. Let's see if they're as good as you think." The death dealers advanced, confident, professional, deadly. Blade raised his foam-covered sword and prepared to sell his life as expensively as possible. Then the sun began to rise. The eastern horizon brightened from black to deep blue, the first hint of dawn bleeding across the sky. The death dealers saw it and hesitated, calculation replacing bloodlust. They had maybe 10 minutes before direct sunlight hit the roof, maybe less. "Take him now," Craven's voice screamed over their radios. "Before dawn." But the hesitation had cost them momentum, and Blade knew, with absolute certainty, that he just had to survive 10 more minutes. 10 minutes until he became the apex predator again. The death dealers knew it too. The Blade could see it in their eyes. The recognition that they'd run out of time, that they were no longer the hunters. They attacked anyway, because they were professionals, because Craven had ordered it, because retreating from a single wounded opponent would be unacceptable. Blade met them with everything he had left. And above, Indifferent and inexorable, the sun continued to rise. Sunrise on a Budapest rooftop became a countdown to extinction. The death dealers advanced with the disciplined desperation of soldiers who knew their victory window was shrinking by the second. The sky had shifted from black to deep indigo, the first orange streaks bleeding through the east. 7 minutes until direct sunlight bathed the roof. Maybe less. Blade planted his back against the rooftop ventilation unit, his body singing with injuries. The silver burn across his back, bullet wounds in his shoulder and calf, cracked ribs from Viktor that had been re-aggravated in the brawl below. His healing factor was working overtime, knitting flesh and bone, but it couldn't keep pace with fresh damage. The foam on his weapons had begun to harden into a crusty, sticky residue, gumming up his sword's mechanisms and weighing down his Glocks. He was cornered, outnumbered, and running on fumes, but he still had his teeth. The first 3 death dealers rushed him in a coordinated spearhead. Blade didn't try to shoot. The foam-clogged slide would jam. Instead, he threw the sword. It wasn't designed for throwing, but his strength and desperation lent it lethal accuracy. The heavy, foam-coated blade spun end over end and took the lead death dealer in the chest with a sickening crunch of bone and armor. The vampire went down with a surprised gurgle, the sword protruding from his sternum. Blade charged the other 2 even as they raised their submachine guns. He closed the distance in a blur of preternatural speed, his injured legs screaming in protest. His hand shot out, grabbing the barrel of the nearest weapon and wrenching it upward as the vampire fired. The burst went wild, stitching the dawn sky. Blade drove his forehead into the vampire's face, feeling cartilage and bone give way. He didn't wait for the vampire to fall. He spun, using the dazed death dealer as a shield against the second one's gunfire. 3 rounds thudded into the vampire's back before Blade hurled the body forward, bowling the shooter over. He didn't stop. He couldn't. Stopping was death. He was on the second vampire before it could stand, his hands finding the creature's head. A savage twist, a wet snap, and another body fell limp. 5 seconds. 2 kills. 12 to go. The remaining death dealers spread out, their training overriding panic. They stopped rushing, began to encircle, keeping their distance. They'd seen what close quarters meant. A shot rang out, and a bullet tore through the meat of Blade's side. He grunted, knee staggering, but didn't go down. The pain was a white-hot spike, but pain was just data. It told him he was still alive. The sky lightened another degree. The horizon was a thin, brilliant line of fire. 5 minutes. "He's weakening," one of the death dealers shouted. "Just keep pouring fire into him." A storm of silver-jacketed lead erupted. Blade dove behind the ventilation unit as bullets chewed chunks of concrete and metal. He was pinned. He couldn't stay here. They'd flank him or simply wait for the sun to force him out. But he couldn't charge 12 armed, prepared vampires. His eyes scanned the rooftop, landing on the body of the first death dealer he'd killed, his sword still buried in its chest. 10 feet away, a suicide run. He made the decision in a microsecond. He burst from cover, not toward the sword, but perpendicular to it. A zigzagging sprint that made him a harder target. Bullets chased him, kicking up sparks at his heels. He reached the edge of the roof, pivoted, and used his momentum to leap up, catching the lip of a higher maintenance platform. He pulled himself up just as a concentrated volley shredded the space he'd just vacated. From this higher vantage, he had a second to assess. The death dealers were repositioning, looking up at him. One was closer to the sword body than the others. The sky was pale gray now. 3 minutes. Blade dropped from the platform, not down to the main roof, but onto the clustered death dealers below. He landed feet first on one vampire's shoulders, driving the creature to the ground with enough force to shatter its spine. Before the others could react, Blade was moving again. A whirlwind of elbows, knees, and crushing grabs. He shattered a jaw, crushed a windpipe, drove a fist through a ribcage to grip a still-beating, icy-cold heart. He was among them now, too close for guns. It was chaos, and chaos was his ally. He snatched a silver dagger from a fallen vampire's belt and went to work. He fought with a brutal, economical savagery, every movement calibrated to maim or kill. He wasn't trying to win a fight. He was trying to survive an execution. A death dealer managed to tackle him from behind, pinning his knife arm. Another lunged with a silver stake aimed at his heart. Blade twisted, taking the stake in the meat of his pinned shoulder instead of his chest. The silver agony was blinding. He roared, a raw, animal sound, and headbutted backward, crushing the face of the vampire holding him. The grip loosened. Blade tore free, yanking the silver stake from his own flesh and plunging it into the eye of the charging vampire. He was bleeding from half a dozen wounds now, his dark coat soaked in a mixture of black vampire ash and his own crimson blood. He was slowing. The death dealers saw it, pressed their advantage. Then the sun crested the horizon. The first direct rays, weak and golden, kissed the eastern edge of the rooftop. A death dealer who had been maneuvering to flank Blade stepped into the light. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then a wisp of smoke rose from his exposed hand. He looked down, confused. The smoke became flame. His scream was cut short as the fire raced up his arm and consumed him in a flash of heat and light, reducing him to a crumbling pillar of ash in less than 2 seconds. The battle froze. Every vampire on the roof looked at the growing rectangle of sunlight, then at Blade, who stood panting, bloodied, but very much alive in the encroaching dawn. Their expressions shifted from predatory fury to primal terror. Blade straightened up, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. He took a step toward the nearest death dealer, who flinched back as if struck. Craven's orders don't mean much now, do they? Blade said, his voice a ragged growl. The sun's advance was relentless, unstoppable. The rectangle of light widened, creeping across the rooftop like a tide. The death dealers began to back away toward the roof access door, their only route to the safety of darkness below. Blade didn't pursue. He walked slowly, deliberately, to the body with his sword in it. He placed a boot on the dead vampire's chest and wrenched the blade free with a wet sound. He turned, holding the gore-smeared weapon loosely at his side, and stood between the vampires and their escape. The message was clear. To reach safety, they had to go through him. And the sun was at his back. It was a standoff measured in inches of advancing sunlight. The lead death dealer, a grizzled veteran with scars marring his pale face, made the call. "He's one man. Rush him together." They tried. They charged as a unit, a final, desperate gamble. Blade didn't meet their charge. He simply stepped aside, into the full, brilliant sunlight, now bathing a third of the roof. The charging vampires skidded to a halt at the edge of the light, as if facing an invisible wall. Their eyes, wide with terror, reflected the rising sun. Blade stood in the light, letting it warm his skin. The contrast was absolute. He was haloed in gold. They were shrouded in retreating shadow. He was whole. They were damned. "Last chance," Blade said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Drop your weapons. Tell me where Craven is." For a moment, he thought they might actually surrender. Then the scarred veteran snarled, raised his gun, and a sniper's shot took off the top of his head from a building across the river. Chaos erupted again. But this time, it wasn't directed at Blade. More sniper rounds cracked through the morning air, precision shots picking off death dealers. They scrambled, not toward Blade, but for any cover from the deadly fire. A black, unmarked helicopter roared into view from behind a neighboring skyscraper, its side door open. A figure stood in the doorway, long coat whipping in the rotor wash. Lucian, Lycan snipers, positioned during the night, were now clearing the roof under the safety of the sun their enemies could not endure. The helicopter hovered and a rope ladder tumbled down. Lucian gestured sharply. Blade didn't need to be told twice. He took a running start and leaped, catching the bottom rung as the helicopter banked away from the rooftop. He hung there for a dizzying moment, looking down at the remaining death dealers shrinking below, now fully exposed and burning as the sun claimed the entire roof. The helicopter swung toward the river, gaining altitude. Blade climbed the ladder with his last reserves of strength and collapsed into the cabin. Reyes was there, hauling him in and slamming the door shut. "Cutting it a little close, a Daywalker," Reyes said. But there was no mockery in his voice, only grim respect. Lucian crouched beside him, his eyes scanning Blade's injuries. Craven anticipated the coordinated strikes. He let us hit the smaller facilities. Facility 3 was a trap designed specifically for you. Team 3 was ambushed and wiped out. We lost good people. Blade leaned his head back against the bulkhead, breathing heavily. Comms? Jammed, then restored once Craven thought he had you. We tracked your thermal signature to the roof. Saw the sun coming. Lucian handed him a canteen of water. You made it to dawn. That was the plan, wasn't it? Survive until the battlefield tipped in your favor. Blade drank deeply. The water was cold, clean. It helped. Where's Craven now? Gone to ground? He'll be at Ordogaz, reporting his victory to Viktor. He'll claim you were killed in the assault, that the body was incinerated in the sun. It consolidates his position. But I'm not dead. No, Lucian said, a fierce smile touching his lips. You are not, and that presents an interesting opportunity. Craven has overplayed his hand. He committed significant resources to kill you publicly. Your survival undermines him completely. Viktor does not tolerate failure. Blade's mind, even through the haze of pain and exhaustion, was working. So we let Craven dig his own grave. He'll be scrambling to cover his failure, making mistakes. Exactly. While he's distracted, we have a narrow window. Lucian pulled out a tablet, showing a schematic of deep underground tunnels beneath Budapest. Amelia's awakening chamber. Viktor has accelerated the timeline. She is being revived as we speak, in a secure bunker near the old city caves. If two elders stand united, even your daylight advantage won't be enough. We must stop the awakening. Blade pushed himself upright, wincing. How long? The awakening ritual takes 12 hours. We have 6 left. Lucian's gaze was intense. This is the strike, Blade. Not against a facility or a squad, but against the future of the Coven itself. Stop Amelia from waking, and we cripple their leadership for a generation. Craven's ambition will tear the rest apart. And Selene? Viktor? Viktor will be at the ritual. It requires an elder's presence. Selene, she will be guarding him. Reyes looked at Blade. You'll have to go through her to get to them. Blade looked out the helicopter window at the city waking below, bathed in harmless, beautiful sunlight. A sunlight that was his greatest weapon and their ultimate prison. He had survived the night. He had turned a trap into a massacre. He had made monsters afraid of the dawn. Now he had to descend back into their darkness. He met Lucian's eyes. Take me to your safe house. I need 2 hours to heal. Then show me these caves. The war wasn't over. It was about to reach its crescendo in the deepest dark, where the sun never reached. But Blade would bring the dawn with him. The Lycan safe house was a symphony of controlled panic. The loss of Team 3, 8 seasoned Lycan warriors, hung in the air like smoke. Blade sat in a corner, shirtless, as Soren worked with grim efficiency. The medic stitched the gash in his side, applied poultices to the silver burns, and injected him with a cocktail of stimulants and coagulants that made his already enhanced metabolism roar. "This will accelerate your healing," Soren muttered. "But it will feel like your blood is on fire, and when it wears off, you'll crash hard." "Noted," Blade gritted out, the sensation already beginning, a volcanic heat spreading from the injection site through his veins, knitting flesh with an almost audible sizzle. Across the room, Lucian addressed his remaining lieutenants. Maps of the old city caves were spread across a table, overlaid with thermal scans and century-old architectural plans. "The awakening chamber is here." Lucian pointed to a deep sub-basement, accessible only through these 3 primary routes. All are heavily fortified. Viktor will have his personal guard, Selene's death dealers, and Craven's people, all watching each other as much as watching for us. "Craven's forces will be compromised," Reyes offered, sharpening a blade. "He's trying to explain how the Daywalker escaped a sunlit roof. He's weak." "He's dangerous because he's weak," Lucian corrected. "A cornered snake strikes fastest. He may try something desperate during the ritual itself to win back favor." Blade stood, testing his body. The pain was receding, replaced by a vibrating, feverish energy. The bullet wounds were closed, pink scar tissue already forming. He picked up his cleaned and re-oiled sword, feeling its perfect balance. "Forget Craven. He's a symptom. Viktor and Amelia are the disease. The ritual, how does it work?" Lucian called over an older Lycan, a historian named Istvan with a scholar's stoop and a warrior's eyes. "The awakening is a blood rite," Istvan explained, his voice raspy. "An elder in hibernation is essentially dead. Their metabolism slowed to near zero. To revive them requires a massive influx of potent blood channeled through the waking elder. Viktor will open his veins into the chamber's circulatory system. For 6 hours, his blood, his strength, his very consciousness will flow into Amelia's form, pulling her back to life. During this time, he is vulnerable. He cannot stop, cannot defend himself. He is utterly dependent on his guards." "So we interrupt the transfusion," Blade said. "It is not so simple," Istvan warned. "The chamber is protected by ancient mechanisms, hydraulic doors that can seal in an instant, fail-safes that will flood the chamber with blood from emergency reserves if the primary flow is cut. To stop it, you must either kill Viktor at the source, which means getting past Seline and the entire guard, or destroy the chamber's heart, the central pump and filtration system, which is buried behind reinforced stone and Lycan-proof alloys." "Lycan-proof?" Reyes sneered. "Designed after the first uprising," Istvan said, "to keep us out." Blade's mind raced, cross-referencing the maps with his own experience, breaching impenetrable places. "The chamber is underground, sealed. Are there environmental systems? Air circulation? Cooling for the machinery?" Istvan's eyebrows rose. He shuffled through the schematics. "Here, ventilation shafts. But they are narrow. Too narrow for a Lycan, and lined with silver mesh to burn us." All eyes turned to Blade. His Dhampir physiology wouldn't react to silver mesh with the same lethal intensity. It would burn, but not incapacitate. "It's a path," Blade said. Not the main assault, but a distraction. Lucian, you and your teams hit the main entrances. Cause maximum chaos. Draw every guard to the front lines. He traced a faint line on the schematic representing a ventilation conduit that snaked behind the chamber's machinery. I go through the silver-lined gut. If I can reach the pump system, you can flood the chamber with something other than blood. Lucian finished, a savage grin spreading. We have canisters of colloidal silver suspension. It won't kill an elder outright, but if it's pumped into Amelia's awakening veins instead of Victor's blood, it would be like injecting them with liquid fire. Istvan whispered, a dark awe in his tone. It could cripple them both. The plan solidified with brutal simplicity, a hammer and anvil. Lucian's Lycans would be the hammer, a loud, violent diversion. Blade would be the anvil, the silent, lethal surprise dropped into the heart of their sanctum. 2 hours later, they moved out. The journey to the cave system was through abandoned subway tunnels and forgotten catacombs, the air growing cold and damp. The Lycans moved with a quiet reverence here. These were their hunting grounds, the shadows where they had fought and bled for centuries. And they reached a point where the human-made tunnels gave way to natural limestone caverns, slick with moisture. Up ahead, faint electric light and the murmur of voices echoed. The vampire outpost. Lucian gathered his 2 remaining strike teams, 15 Lycans in total, all that could be spared. Their faces were painted with grim determination. They knew the odds. This was not a raid for survival. It was a sacrifice play to buy blade time. Remember, Lucian said, his voice low and carrying in the cavern. We do not need to win. We need them to believe this is the only attack. We need every guard, every death dealer looking at us. He clasped forearms with Rays, with Singe, with each of them. No more words were necessary. He turned to Blade. The ventilation access is a half-mile east, behind a false rock wall. Istvan will show you. We give you 20 minutes to get in position. Then we strike. Blade nodded. For a moment, Hunter and Rebel leader locked eyes, an understanding passing between them that transcended species or alliance. They were both weapons aimed at the same heart. Don't die down here, Daywalker, Rays grunted. You either, Blade replied. He followed Istvan through a narrow, dripping fissure in the rock, leaving the Lycans to their fate. The old historian moved with surprising agility, leading him to a section of wall that looked no different from any other. With a grunt, Istvan pressed on a specific stone, and a section swung inward with a sigh of stale air. The way is there, Istvan said, pointing into a black metal shaft that slanted downward. A faint, acrid smell of ozone and metal hit Blade's nose, the silver mesh. The mesh begins after 20 meters. May your blood run cold and your purpose burn hot. Blade entered the shaft without another word. He crawled forward, the space so tight his shoulders brushed the sides. True to Istvan's word, after 20 meters, the smooth metal gave way to a woven, grating surface that glinted dully in the beam of his penlight. Silver. The first contact was a searing pain against his palms and knees. Smoke wisped up, carrying the smell of burning leather and flesh. Blade clenched his jaw and kept moving, the stimulants in his system barely keeping the agony at bay. Each movement was a fresh brand. He focused on the count of his breaths, on the schematic burned into his memory. Left turn, 50 meters, downward slope. The sounds of battle began to reach him, muffled by stone and metal, but unmistakable. The distant thunder of explosives, the staccato chatter of automatic weapons, the roars of Lycans and the shouts of vampires. Lucian had started the dance. Right turn, 70 meters. The silver mesh ended abruptly, giving way to cool, smooth ceramic pipe. Blade allowed himself one shuddering breath, his hands raw and bleeding. He could hear machinery now, the deep, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of hydraulic pumps, the hiss of pressurizing fluids. He reached a grate overlooking a vast, cathedral-like mechanical space. Below him was the heart of the awakening chamber. A central crystalline vat, pulsing with a deep crimson light, connected to a web of transparent tubes that ran into the wall, presumably to the adjacent chamber where Viktor and Amelia performed their ritual. The vat was the reservoir and pump, filtering and pressurizing Viktor's blood before it entered Amelia's hibernation cocoon. Vampire technicians in sterile suits monitored banks of glowing consoles. Blade counted 6 technicians, 4 armed guards stationed at the doors. His entry point was 30 feet above the floor, a sheer drop onto unforgiving machinery. The sounds of battle from the front were intensifying. An alarm blared within the pump room. One of the guards spoke into a headset. "The Lycan assault is concentrated on the north and east gates. All reserve guards to the front. The Elder must not be disturbed." Perfect. Lucian was performing brilliantly. 2 of the 4 guards ran out, heading toward the fighting. The remaining 2 took up more alert positions, but their attention was clearly divided and listening to the distant combat. Blade didn't wait. He kicked out the ventilation grate. It clattered to the floor with a deafening crash in the sterile silence. As all heads snapped up, he dropped. He landed on top of one of the technicians, the impact crushing the vampire beneath him. He was moving before the body hit the ground. A silver throwing star took one guard in the throat. The second guard fired, but Blade was already in motion, rolling behind the central crystalline vat. Bullets sparked off the ultra-hard material. The remaining guard and 2 technicians scrambled for cover and alarms. Blade ignored them. His target was the machinery. He pulled a shaped charge from his belt, courtesy of Lucian's arsenal, and slapped it onto the main feed line leading from the pump to the wall. He primed it for a 3-second delay. A technician lunged at him with a sonic scalpel. Blade caught his wrist, snapped it, and drove the vibrating blade into the vampire's chest. The second technician was fumbling with a sidearm. Blade shot him twice in the head with his Glock. The last guard had taken cover behind a console. "You're too late," he screamed. "The transfusion is at 60%. She's already stirring." The shaped charge detonated. The explosion was contained, brilliant and devastating. The main feed line shattered, spraying the room with a jet of pressurized, shimmering crimson blood. The deep thump-thump of the pump stuttered, then whined into a rising shriek of failing mechanics. But the guard was right. The failsafe activated. With a hiss of hydraulics, emergency valves opened. From secondary reservoirs, a silvery and metallic fluid surged into the system to replace the lost blood. The colloidal silver. Blade allowed himself a grim smile. It was working. Then the door to the ritual chamber exploded inward. Selene stood in the doorway, her black coat streaked with dust and Lycan blood, her eyes blazing with a fury colder than the grave. Behind her, Blade could see the ritual chamber, a nightmare of organic technology, with Viktor, pale and strained, his wrists slit and connected to pulsing tubes, kneeling before a stone coffin where a female form began to twitch. The silvery fluid had already reached the chamber, mixing with the blood in the tubes, turning the luminous crimson into a sickly, glowing violet. "You," Selene breathed. The word filled with a hatred that had crystallized over centuries of warfare and focused now solely on him. Viktor's head lifted, his eyes locking on Blade. They were wide with pain, but also with a dawning, apocalyptic rage. The fluid reaching Amelia's coffin began to smoke. Blade raised his sword toward Selene. "Just you and me now." She drew her own twin blades, their edges singing in the charged air. "This ends now, Daywalker." The chamber shuddered. From the coffin, a raw, deafening scream of agony erupted. Amelia, awaking to a baptism of liquid silver. The scream was not just sound. It was a wave of psychic pain that rattled the machinery and made the very stones groan. The heart of the Covenant was wounded. And in the doorway, the two deadliest warriors in Budapest prepared to decide who would walk away from its corpse. The world narrowed to the space between them. The sterile, blood-spattered pump room, now filling with the echoing scream of a poisoned goddess. Viktor's own cry of rage and agony joined Amelia's, a dissonant chorus of ancient pain. But Blade's focus was absolute, a diamond-tipped spear aimed at the ice-eyed death dealer in the doorway. Seline moved first. She didn't charge. She flowed, a liquid shadow closing the distance with impossible grace, her twin blades weaving a lattice of silver death. Blade met her, his own heavier sword a counterpoint of brutal force to her lethal precision. The clash of steel was a sharp, percussive counter-rhythm to the mechanical shrieks and dying screams around them. She was better than before. At Ordogaz, she had been analyzing, testing. Now she knew. Every feint, every parry, every transition was executed with the flawless economy of a master who had distilled 6 centuries of killing into instinct. She used her environment, kicking over consoles to trip his advance, using the low-hanging conduits to pivot and strike from unexpected angles. Blade fought with the controlled fury of a wildfire. His style was older, rooted in 1,000 life-or-death street fights and dojo-shattering brawls. Where she was a scalpel, he was a chainsaw. He broke her elegant patterns with overwhelming power, forcing her to expend energy deflecting blows that would have cleaved her in two. His wounded leg protested, slowing his pivot. Selene saw it. Her blade snaked past his guard, scoring a line of fire across his ribs. He ignored it, using the opening to slam his forearm into her jaw. She staggered, her blood, black and cold, trickling from her lip, but her eyes never lost their glacial focus. "You have destroyed everything," she hissed, resetting her stance. "I'm just getting started," Blade growled. Behind her, the ritual chamber was chaos. Viktor had torn the tubes from his wrists, black blood and silvery fluid spraying the ancient stones. He stumbled toward Amelia's coffin, his face a mask of horror. The female form within was convulsing, her awakening flesh reacting violently to the colloidal silver infusion. Smoke rose from the coffin, carrying the scent of burning ozone and spoiled immortality. "Victor!" Selene shouted, a fraction of her attention wavering. It was all the opening Blade needed. He disengaged his sword lock with a twist and drove his boot into her sternum. She flew back into the ritual chamber, he crashing against the base of Amelia's dais. Blade followed, stepping over the threshold. The atmosphere here was thick with ancient power and fresh ruin. Victor stood over the coffin, his hands hovering uselessly over Amelia's smoldering form. He turned his gaze on Blade, and the sheer weight of his hatred was a physical force. "What have you done?" Viktor's voice was a ruin, stripped of all its aristocratic composure, raw with a loss so profound it bordered on madness. "Leveled the playing field," Blade said, raising his sword. He could feel the wrongness in the room. The colloidal silver wouldn't kill an elder, not directly, but it was a poison, corruption in the blood. Amelia was awake, but she was broken, screaming in a language older than Babylon. Her power, instead of coalescing, was leaking out in erratic, dangerous waves, unmaking the air crackle with static. Selene regained her feet, placing herself between Blade and Victor. "My lord, "You must stabilize her. I will handle this." Viktor seemed to crumble for a moment, his millennia of certainty shattered. He looked from Selene to the writhing Amelia, his life's work unraveling in smoke and screams. A decision hardened in his eyes. Survival, not of his mate, but of his power. With a snarl of utter contempt, he turned his back on Amelia's coffin and lunged not at Blade, but at a stone panel on the far wall. He slammed his fist into it, and a section slid away, revealing a dark passage. An escape route, of course. "Selene, hold him," Viktor commanded, and vanished into the darkness. Selene didn't hesitate. Her loyalty was absolute, even to a fleeing master. She renewed her assault on Blade with desperate ferocity. Her attacks now purely defensive, aimed solely at keeping him from the passage. Blade batted aside a flurry of strikes. "He left you to die. I serve the Covenant," she screamed, the words sounding hollow in the poison chamber. He saw his chance. Instead of pressing her, he changed targets. With a mighty heave, he threw his sword not at Selene, but like a javelin at the mechanism above the stone passage. The heavy blade struck true, shearing through ancient gears. With a groan of protesting stone, the hidden door began to grind shut, sealing Viktor's escape. A roar of pure fury echoed from the narrowing darkness before it sealed completely. Viktor was trapped elsewhere in the complex. Now it was just the two of them and the dying elder. Selene's breath came in ragged gasps. She looked at the sealed door, and then at Amelia's still smoking form, then at Blade. For the first time, he saw something in her eyes besides hatred or duty. Dislocation. The pillars of her world, Viktor's strength, the Covenant's purpose, were crumbling to ash around her. Blade retrieved his sword. "It's over, Selene. It will never be over," she whispered. But the fight had gone out of her voice. A new sound cut through the chamber, the crunch of boots on stone, the snarls of Lycans. Lucian, Rays, and 3 bloodied but alive Lycans burst into the chamber from the main entrance. They were battered. Singe was missing an arm, but they were standing. They had survived the diversion. Lucian took in the scene. The poisoned Amelia, the sealed door, Selene standing defeated before Blade. His golden eyes glowed with triumph and vengeance. "The front is secure," Lucian rasped. Craven's forces broke when they heard the screams. They're running like rats. He leveled a massive pistol at Selene. "Finish her, Blade, and then we dig Viktor out of his hole." Selene straightened, lifting her blades once more. A final, defiant gesture. Blade looked at her, this perfect weapon forged by a tyrant, now masterless in a ruined temple. He looked at Lucian, whose finger was tightening on the trigger. He thought of the warehouse, of the humans she'd called traitors, of the centuries of war. "No," Blade said. The chamber froze. Lucian's eyes snapped to him. "What?" "She's not yours to kill," Blade said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He took a step toward Selene. "You've spent your life serving a lie. You've protected monsters who see you as a useful tool. Oh, Viktor just proved that. He left you to die so he could run." Selene said nothing, but her knuckles were white on her hilts. "You have a choice now," Blade continued. "You can die here, for nothing. Or you can pick up that famous brain of yours and use it. Look at what your Covenant really is." He gestured to the twitching, pitiful form of Amelia. "Look at what your loyalty bought you." The silence stretched, broken only by Amelia's weakening whimpers. Slowly, impossibly, Selene's blades lowered. They didn't drop, but the killing intent bled out of her stance. She stared at the coffin, at the sealed door, and something ancient and rigid inside her seemed to fracture. Lucian growled. "This is a mistake. She is Death Dealer. She will betray us the moment it suits her." "Probably," Blade agreed, never taking his eyes off Selene. "But right now, she knows where Viktor is hiding. She knows the secrets of this complex, and she hates Craven almost as much as you do." He finally looked at Lucian. "You wanted to shatter their power. This is how. Turn their greatest weapon against them." The calculus of war played out across Lucian's face. Distrust, pragmatism, vengeance, opportunity. He slowly lowered his gun. "If she moves against us, I will peel the skin from her bones myself." Selene finally spoke, her voice flat, empty. "The passage leads to the old cisterns. There is a panic room, armored, with independent life support. Viktor will be there. Craven will be trying to find him, to either protect him or kill him, depending on his assessment of the battle." Blade nodded. "Then let's go introduce ourselves." He turned his back on her, also an act of either supreme confidence or madness, and walked toward the Lycans. After a heartbeat of tense silence, Selene's footsteps followed, a ghost joining the procession of monsters. The alliance was forged not in trust, but in mutual annihilation. The war for Budapest's soul had just entered its final, bloody phase, and the most dangerous predator in the city had just changed sides. The descent into the cisterns was a journey into the city's black heart. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of stagnant water and wet stone. Lucian led, his remaining Lycans, Raise, Singe, her stump hastily cauterized, and two others, forming a wary perimeter. Blade walked in the center, a vigilant neutral force. Selene brought up the rear, her presence a cold spot at their backs, her every movement tracked by Lycan eyes burning with centuries-old hatred. She navigated without hesitation, pointing out pressure plates disguised as flagstones, indicating side passages that led to dead ends or death traps. Her intelligence was clinical, detached, as if she were briefing a mission for a master who no longer existed. The betrayal, when it came, would be spectacular. Blade knew it. Lucian knew it. For now, her knowledge was the key. "The panic room is ahead," she said, her voice echoing in the vast, dripping darkness. They had entered a colossal underground reservoir, its vaulted brick ceiling lost in shadow. Murky water stretched into blackness, punctuated by stone columns. "It's built into the central support column. Only one entrance. He will have sealed it." "How do we breach it?" Lucian asked, scanning the distant column with a thermal scope. "No heat signatures. He's shielded." "You don't breach it," Selene said. "You convince him to open it. He has external sensors, audio, visual." Raze snorted. "And you think he'll open up for a chat?" "He might," Blade said, his eyes on Selene. "For her." Her gaze met his, understanding flashing in their icy depths. A gambit, the ultimate deception. She gave a single, sharp nod. They moved to the water's edge. A narrow stone causeway led out to the central column, ending at a seamless metal door. As they approached, a speaker crackled to life. "Selene." Viktor's voice was strained, stripped of its former grandeur, buzzing with static. "I see the vermin with you. Explain." Selene stepped forward, into the glow of a lone security light. Her posture was perfect, her voice steady, the model of a loyal death dealer reporting in. "My lord, the Lycan assault was a diversion. The Daywalker infiltrated the pump system. Amelia's awakening has been compromised." A hiss of static. "I am aware. And the Daywalker?" "Dead," Selene said without a flicker of hesitation. "I engaged him in the ritual chamber after you made your tactical withdrawal. He is Ash. The Lycans you see are my prisoners. I used them to force my way through their lines to reach you. The silence from the speaker was long, filled with the drip of water and the weight of 1,000 years of paranoia. You expect me to believe you subdued Lucian and his pack alone? I expect you to believe the evidence of your censors, Selene countered, her voice hardening with a hint of reproach. You abandoned the ritual. The Covenant is in chaos. Craven's forces are routed or have turned. I am the only loyalist who fought through to you. Now, you can either open this door so we can plan our counterstroke, or you can sit in your tomb and wait for Craven to drill through and finish what the Daywalker started. He is already consolidating power above, declaring you unfit to rule. It was a masterpiece. Truth, lies, and pointed barbs woven together, and it offered Viktor salvation and stoked his deepest fears, impotence and betrayal by the ambitious Craven. With a heavy clunk of disengaging locks, the metal door slid open. Viktor stood just inside, pale and diminished. The grandeur was gone, replaced by the ragged demeanor of a cornered animal. He saw Selene, the bound and snarling Lycans, playing their parts with gusto, and his shoulders slumped in relief. That relief lasted precisely 2 seconds. Blade moved from the shadows behind the Lycans, a black phantom resolving in the doorway. His sword was already in motion. Viktor's eyes went wide. Treachery, he screamed, stumbling back, but it was too late. Blade's sword cleaved downward. Viktor, weakened from the aborted ritual and poisoned by his own transfused, silver-tainted blood, was slow. The blade sheared through his collarbone and deep into his chest. Black blood, thick and cold, erupted. Yet an elder does not die easily. With a roar that shook dust from the cistern ceiling, Viktor backhanded Blade with a surge of dying strength, sending him crashing into the wall. Viktor clutched the ghastly wound, his body already trying to heal around the silver-edged steel buried in it. I will drown this world in your blood, Viktor shrieked, his form beginning to blur with preternatural speed as he prepared to sell his existence dearly. He never got the chance. Selene moved. It was not the fluid, elegant combat of before. It was something raw, efficient, and final. As Viktor lunged toward the blade, she stepped into his path. Not with her blades, but with her hands. She caught his forearms, not to stop him, but to guide him. Using his own momentum, she spun, and with a twist born of intimate knowledge of vampire anatomy, knowledge Viktor himself had taught her, she broke both his arms at the elbows with sickening crunches. Viktor screamed, not in pain, but in utter, soul-deep betrayal. He looked into the eyes of his masterpiece, his daughter in blood, his most loyal killer. You left me to die, Selene said, her voice as cold and empty as the space between stars. The Covenant was a lie. You are a lie. She released him. As he stumbled, disarmed and broken, Lucian was there. The Lycan leader didn't roar, didn't gloat. His vengeance was quiet, sacred, and 600 years overdue. He placed the muzzle of his massive pistol against Viktor's forehead. For every Lycan you ever collared, Lucian whispered. For every child of the moon you broke on your wheel. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Viktor's head snapped back. For a moment, the ancient elder stood, a look of profound surprise etched on his features. Then, like a sandcastle hit by a wave, his entire body crumbled inward, dissolving into a cascade of ancient gray ash that settled on the wet stone floor. The silence that followed was absolute. The architect of a millennium of war was a pile of dust. Blade pulled himself upright, retrieving his sword from the ash. He looked at Selene. She stood staring at the remains, her face a mask. He couldn't tell what was going on behind her eyes: grief, liberation, or simply a vast, echoing void. Lucian stirred the ashes with his boot, a deep, rumbling sigh escaping him, when the weight of centuries seemed to lift from his shoulders, replaced by a new, uncertain burden. What comes after the tyrant falls? A new voice shattered the quiet, smooth and laced with mocking applause. "Bravo! A truly moving performance." From behind a far column, Craven emerged, flanked by a dozen of his most loyal death dealers. He was smiling, the handsome, arrogant smile of a man who has just watched his two greatest rivals eliminate each other. "I must thank you," Craven said, stepping delicately around a puddle. "You've saved me the trouble of a messy coup. Victor, the unstable elder, slain by the rogue Daywalker and his Lycan allies. A tragedy. I, as the last remaining senior regent, will be forced to assume control of the coven to ensure stability. The narrative writes itself." Lucian growled, raising his gun. Craven's death dealers raised theirs in unison. Ah, Craven tutted. "You're wounded, outnumbered, and in my crosshairs. The smart play, Lucian, would be to take your mongrels and slink back to the shadows. A new era is beginning, one with clearer boundaries." He turned his smile to Selene. "And you, my dear. What a devastating pivot. From favorite daughter to patricidal traitor in one night. There's no place for you in the old covenant or in my new order. But as a gesture of my gratitude, I'll make your death quick." He nodded to his soldiers. "Kill them all." The cistern erupted in gunfire. Craven's death dealers fired from cover, disciplined and lethal. A Lycan went down immediately, his chest torn open. Rays roared, returning fire with a captured assault rifle. Blade knew the numbers didn't lie. They were in a kill box again. But this time, they had a weapon Craven hadn't fully accounted for. He looked at Seline and jerked his head toward a flanking column. She understood instantly. While the Lycans laid down suppressing fire, drawing Craven's attention, Blade and Selene broke in opposite directions, vanishing into the forest of stone pillars. The hunter and the huntress had become predators on the same pack. Craven, confident behind his wall of fire, didn't notice they were gone until it was too late. Seline appeared from the shadows to his left, her blades a silver whirlwind that decapitated two death dealers before they could turn. From the right, Blade came like a thunderclap, his sword cutting through weapons and limbs alike. Craven's perfect formation collapsed into panicked confusion, me caught between Lucian's furious Lycans and two apex killers working in unspoken, brutal tandem. It was not a battle. It was dismantling. Blade fought toward Craven, who was backpedaling, his smugness replaced by terror. The regent fumbled for a sleek pistol. Blade slapped it from his hand, grabbed him by the throat, and lifted him off the ground. "The narrative," Blade said, his voice a low rumble, "just got a rewrite." Craven choked, clawing at Blade's iron grip. "Wait, I can offer..." Seline appeared beside Blade. She looked at the struggling, pathetic figure who had coveted Victor's throne. Her expression was one of pure, distilled contempt. "The new era," she said, echoing his words, "has no need for you either." She plunged her blade into Craven's heart. His eyes bulged, a final, shocked protest dying on his lips. Blade dropped the body, and it too dissolved into insignificance. The remaining death dealers, seeing their leader gone, broke and fled into the darkness. The cistern fell silent once more, the only sounds the heavy breathing of the survivors and the eternal drip of water. Lucian walked over to Craven's ashes, then to Victor's, then looked at the sealed panic room door. The old order was literally dust. He turned to face Blade and Seline. "The coven is headless," Lucian stated. Amelia is crippled. The death dealers are scattered. The war is over. Or it's just beginning, Reyes muttered, watching Selene with undisguised suspicion as she cleaned her blade. Blade sheathed his sword. The feverish energy from the stimulants was fading, replaced by deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The cost was counted in Lycan dead, in a poisoned elder screaming in the dark above, in the fundamental laws of this world broken. He looked at Selene. What now for you? She looked back at him, then at the Lycans, then at the vast, dark cistern. The weapon had no war to fight. The soldier had no army. I don't know, she said, and for the first time, she sounded lost. Lucian stepped forward, his gaze encompassing them both. The balance is shattered. Without the Coven's tyranny, my people have a chance. But power abhors a vacuum. Something will fill it. He looked at Blade. You are leaving. I have my own world, Blade said. My own vampires to kill. He'd seen no sign of the dimensional rift that brought him here. But if one opened, another could. Lucian nodded. He extended his hand once more. Then go with the knowledge that you change the fate of a world. For better or worse, you are a legend here. Blade shook the Lycan's hand. He looked at Seline one last time, gave a curt nod, and turned, melting into the shadows of the cistern, a ghost returning to the spaces between worlds. Lucian, Reyes, Singe, and Selene stood amidst the ashes of kings. Above them, a city slept, unaware that the ancient war beneath its streets had ended in fire and blood. A new night was coming, and for the first time in 600 years, its dawn was uncertain. In the days that followed, Budapest's supernatural landscape transformed. The Lycans, under Lucian, emerged from the shadows not as rebel slaves, but as the dominant power in a broken ecosystem. The Vampire Coven, its leadership annihilated and its infrastructure in ruins, splintered into feuding factions, more concerned with survival than supremacy. Amelia, the poisoned elder, vanished from her chamber, becoming a whispered myth, a sleeping sickness waiting in the deep dark. And Selene, the perfect weapon with no war left to fight, also disappeared. Some said she went hunting the remnants of the death dealers who had served Craven. Others whispered she sought a way to purge the silver from Amelia's blood, to fix the one thing her betrayal had broken. Lucian kept a wary eye on the rumors, knowing that a sword that sharp could not simply be sheathed forever. As for Blade, the Daywalker became a story. A phantom of justice that descended from nowhere, broke the unbreakable, and vanished with the dawn. To the surviving vampires, he was a nightmare used to frighten fledglings. To the Lycans, he was the catalyst of their liberation, a grim specter of vengeance they were glad to see depart. But in the infinite tapestry of the multiverse, threads cross and recross. A tear in reality once opened leaves a scar. Somewhere, in a world of gleaming towers and scattered vampire covens, Eric Brooks continued his eternal hunt, the scent of a different kind of vampire, aristocratic, organized, and cruel, now forever etched in his memory, and in the silent, dripping cisterns beneath Budapest, in a pile of ancient ash, a single, an unusual element not of that earth was slowly dissolving. A trace of something foreign, a clue waiting for a hunter from another reality to one day follow back. The war was over. The hunt, however, is eternal.